One with strength of steel wings. Disclaimer, no profit being made. Obviously, I'll state it once here, and consider it forever said. Please read. This will be a rewrite of my earlier story, much expanded. It will be a slow-building story, because I want the characters to be in character the whole time. That means there has to be a reason for them to act in certain ways. A foundation must be built before the walls of a house. However, this story has a complete outline, and so will be finished in its own time. It will begin far before Hogwarts and explore Harry turning into an independent boy who can only rely on himself. Then it will go to Hogwarts for a few years, before the story once more turns completely original and expands to include the global magical community. This will explore the ramifications of a world where certain muggles find out about wizards and all the different ways in which both parties respond. It will go into the whys of what the wizards have done, and both the positive and negative aspects of it. And most of all, it will be a lesson on humanity, that nothing in the world can truly be black and white, good and evil, positive or negative. Prelude. 3 months after the official end of hostilities in the country of Britain, a dark-haired man stood atop the highest tower of Hogwarts. He wore only a loose pair of black pants that rippled in the wind that blew harshly upon the castle from the mountains nearby. Below him, spread out in a complex network of lights and movement, the reconstruction continued as various wizards began the extensive project to restore Hogwarts to its pre-war glory. The man watched them numbly, seeing occasional faces turn upward in his direction before quickly looking away when they saw his gaze. He heard footsteps upon the stairs, tentatively edging their way up towards the top of the tower, the walls of the round room broken down to show only open air. They paused at the last stair, before a rough throat cleared itself. The dark-haired man turned, piercing green eyes meeting frightened hazel ones as the newcomer shifted from side to side. He attempted to smile, something that came out more as a grimace, before gesturing the nervous man towards two chairs set up on the far side of the tower room where a piece of roof still remained, braced on two wooden beams. The man shuffled forward, dressed in a muggle suit and tie, not meeting his gaze, while pulling out paper and pen and sitting gingerly. For a moment they observed each other, one fidgeting and the other silent as the crumbling stone around them. Then slowly his gaze lowered to the small table. The hazel-eyed man spoke. "Mr. Potter, sir, I'm not sure where to start, if this is even a good time. Mr. Malfoy told me to come straight up." The dark-haired man, Mr. Potter, sat quietly and absently shook his head in the negative. His voice, when it spoke, was slightly hoarse. "No, this is as good a time as ever. You know my reasons for this, of course." Mr. Potter drifted off, waiting for the other man to speak. He did so, eyes looking around, anywhere but at the dark man sitting across from him. "Yes, sir. An autobiography to combat the bad press. Call me Harry. You will soon know more about me than all but my closest friends." The man's eyes widened, his head shaking as he met emerald eyes for the first time since coming up into the tower. "Oh no, sir, I mustn't. After all you've done for us, I could never." Harry cut him off with a swift hand gesture before looking out over the countryside towards the white-capped mountains. A smile began to come to his lips as he spoke again, attempting to put the man at ease. "Mr. Cleric, tell me, what is it people say about me?" Cleric looked down, his eyes flickering across the table as if looking for some secret. He spoke tentatively, leery of riling the wizard's ire. "They say you are a hero, that you have saved us all. And—" The man shifted, his hands absently toying with a sheet of paper. When he spoke, it was slowly at first, before he gained momentum, speaking faster as he gained steam. "They say you are dangerous, that you've done unspeakable things. They say you should be exiled, perhaps. They say we know nothing of what you are, and that you are the only one of your kind. They say you sacrificed innocents and enemies in obscure rituals to gain power, that you tortured Death Eaters into insanity, that you killed in cold blood, that you cannot be trusted. Some say that you will be the next Dark Lord." Harry Potter looked the man over, Cleric's face now flushed, his body braced to receive a blow. He spoke again, softly. "Mr. Cleric John, I chose you from hundreds of reporters and biographers, muggle and wizard alike, because they say you are honest, because your reputation is impeccable, and because you are not my friend. You did not fight for me. You were not here in Britain during the Blood War. That's what they are calling it now, right? Tell me, what do you see when you look at me?" The man's eyes reluctantly turned to him, running over his naked chest. Scars rippled across its surface. Some detailed complicated patterns, waves running across flesh, while others were the telltale marks of muggle and magical wounds. Behind his back 2 wings rose regally, barred black and silver, their heavy feathers softly chiming with metallic clicks in the wind. The man opened and closed his mouth, unsure how to speak. "Aye, sir. Different, you look. Different." Harry leaned forward slightly, laying out a single hand palm up on the table. On its palm lay a single raised scar depicting a single rune. Harry spoke, his tone calm and even. "You described it perfectly with that one word. I am different, and people fear difference. They deserve an explanation of sorts. They are scared out there, some hiding behind their petty words, others hiding behind adoring praise. But all of them scared, scared of me, scared of what they cannot understand, scared of what I am about to do. And you, John, will help me educate them. You will tell them my story." Hazel eyes rose, meeting his own. Determination began to steal across their surface, the chin rising, the trembling halting in tanned skin. Cleric was a good reporter, and before him was the opportunity of a lifetime, the making or breaking of his career. If he succeeded, his name would forever be connected to one of the most well-known people in the world. "Yes, Mr. Harry." Harry smiled, leaning back. He looked down at the stack of blank paper and over at the muggle pen grasped in the reporter's hand. A smile began on his face, and he closed his eyes. He turned his mind back, across the many years and triumphs and heartbreaks, back to when it all began, when things that could have been became different. He spoke, his voice deep and distant. "It all happened because of a single event, some 10 years ago now. The beginning of everything. I was living with my aunt and Uncle Dursley in Muggle Surrey." An excerpt from Memorable Muggle Mornings, The Undercover Wizard. "Today, at exactly 6 o'clock a.m., I rose and made some tea. My lovely cat, Perniscus, purred for some milk which I graciously granted her. The Muggle life is so peaceful, no clattering parts spellbound whisking about the room, no hoity-toity wizarding owls swooping in at all times of day. I miss cleaning spells the most, but with me alone not much mess is made, if one is careful, as I am of course. You can go complete weeks without lifting a cleaning finger, and such wonderful devices these muggles have made to clean for you. Have you ever heard of a dishwasher? Wonderful invention. Came from America in the..." A young black-haired boy watched silently through the slats in the cupboard door as 2 men came stomping heavily and holding a big cardboard box between them. Emerald eyes shone sadly, before he leaned back onto his dusty mattress made of old blankets and stained sheets. Broken toys looked down on him from 2 small wooden shelves, and a burnt-out light bulb reflected a speck of light from the small opening in the door. He made himself sit still, for his uncle has been very specific. Stay silent and no funny business. And then he had slammed and bolted the cupboard door. His uncle's voice had wavered with anger, a tremor that made Harry shake, knowing what would come of it. His family, the Dursleys, consisted of his Uncle Vernon, Aunt Petunia, and their son Dudley. Aunt Petunia was his mum's sister, though she never spoke of her and had no pictures. He just called them Uncle and Aunt and Sir and Ma'am and Dudley, and knew enough to stay out of their way. He wasn't normal, and his uncle often just called him Freak, because he was different from them. He was different because his parents had died when he was a baby, and they were taking him in from the kindness of their hearts, and sometimes he would wish really hard, and things would happen. Things that normally warranted a good thrashing from his uncle and shrieks from his aunt, which brought his attention to the men coming back and forth outside of his door. A week earlier, Harry quietly entered the kitchen, his steps soft. Aunt was watching her specials on the telly, and Harry knew he would get into trouble if he made any noise whatsoever. Lunch that day had been sparse in more ways than one. Not only had he gotten less to eat than his pudgy cousin, but Aunt was on another one of her health kicks. This one was triggered by a not-so-concerned comment from a fellow parent about her precious Dudder's expanding waistline. While making Aunt angry, it had also brought attention to a growing problem, namely Dudley's weight, which was growing ever more since Dudley's birthday present of a new gaming console. His bird-thin aunt had then decided, for the betterment of the entire household, i.e. Uncle and Dudley, that the new eating regimen be implemented right away. Greens, greens, more greens, and some silly white chalky stuff called tofu. Harry shuddered with disgust. He could bear the low-fat milk and sugar supplements, but not that sometimes soggy, sometimes stiff tofu. He knew it wouldn't last any longer than it did the last few times, but he was still hungry enough to attempt to sneak a snack. He knew it could mean trouble, but he was hungry. He had been this desperate a few times before and hadn't yet been caught. He always made sure Uncle was at work and Aunt busy and Dudley gone. Checklist complete, he tiptoed over to the fridge. It was just as Harry was reaching in to grab a tub of leftovers that Trouble spoke up. Literally. "Freak, what do you think you're doing?" It was Dudley. His cousin had squeezed into the kitchen just as silently as Harry, but spoke up in his anger at seeing his freak of a cousin trying to sneak a bite of his food. No matter that Dudley had had the same plan as his cousin, but Dudley thought to himself, that ungrateful snit didn't deserve a whit more than he was given. Harry gawked, startled, his voice stuttering and shaking as he backed away from the refrigerator. "I'm, just cleaning up, tidying the fridge, throwing out the old stuff." Harry groaned mentally. If that wasn't the lamest excuse ever. He quickly tried to slide past the large Dudley and back to the refuge of his cupboard when Dudley lashed out and grabbed him much faster than he would have given his cousin credit for. Harry squeaked, bracing himself for a bruising fist, when he felt his foot catch underneath the kitchen table. He frantically tried to push away, but Dudley began to pull him closer, and down he went, his hand outstretched to catch him. The angle was all wrong, and his wrist bent with a toe-curling sensation of pain, and Harry let out a surprised and painful yell. Then his knees both hit the ground, Dudley falling on top of him, and the pain was like stars behind his eyes, red and yellow and orange, and a panic built up like a pressure in his chest, before popping with an audible shattering noise. His ears began to ring, and Dudley was suddenly scrambling off him, yelling himself, pushing Harry painfully back onto his hurt wrist. "What's going on in here, Dudley?" Aunt Petunia let out a scream. Harry sat up and realized the ringing noise he was hearing was actually the smoke detector blaring from the kitchen ceiling. He looked around blearily, seeing his horrified aunt hurrying over to a shaken Dudley, huddled in a corner, wide eyes locked on the appliances that were currently belching smoke. Every appliance in the kitchen had been fried, even the microwave and the electric toaster. Uncle had been furious, his pudgy face red and his eyes bulging. He had been expecting to purchase a new car soon, and fixing the damage was going to set him back by at least a year. His uncle hadn't even touched him since the accident, not even the littlest spanking, and he had no idea what was going to happen. Uncle wasn't known to not punish any little offense, not to mention one that had done so much damage. Harry had at least expected a beating and to be locked in his cupboard. This calm rage his uncle was displaying currently was foreign to Harry. Dudley had also been avoiding him, no longer pushing him around or speaking sharp insults. He had avoided him in the hallway and didn't meet his eyes at the dinner table. He had even flinched when Harry accidentally bumped into him while serving breakfast, which caused Uncle to pale and his hands to shake. Harry had cringed, expecting retaliation, only to slowly relax as none came. He was confused, this behavior new to him. He began to feel on edge, startling easily, creeping more silently than ever about the house as he cleaned. What was going on? The men from the electronics store left the house with a cheerful farewell several hours later, and his uncle came over and unlatched his cupboard door and dragged him out by the arm. "Go clean the kitchen, and be quick about it." His uncle snarled venomously at him before stomping into the living room. Harry trudged over to the kitchen, looking over the dust and boxes, and slowly began cleaning, favoring his sore left wrist. The cabinets were fixed from the smoke damage, and a nice new stove and dishwasher were gleaming in their spots. He moved the boxes they had come in over to the side while he swept the floor and counters, then carefully peeked out into the living room at his uncle. "Sir, I'm finished." Harry spoke carefully. His uncle looked up, then an odd smile spread across his face. He stomped into the kitchen, looked around, and grabbed the box the dishwasher had come in and put it by the back door. "Well, freak, I bet you've been wondering why you haven't been punished yet for the little stunt you pulled the other day. Your aunt and I have had a long talk, and we've had enough of you and your freakiness. We've found a woman in the country who wants someone to clean her house for her and help look after her animals. She's going to pay us a nice monthly stipend for the labor." You can stay there until you are old enough to leave. We will tell people that another wealthier relative of ours has come forward to take over your care. You will not tell anyone otherwise. Do you understand me?" Harry shrank down from his uncle, the warning in his voice unmistakable. He began to nod his head while his thoughts swam in turmoil. A small part of him rejoiced at escaping the clutches of his uncle, but the larger part was afraid of leaving the only life he had ever known. His uncle seemed satisfied with his meek response, his flushed face returning to its normal color. The large man straightened, tightening his hand around a set of keys in his fist. He spoke again, gesturing towards the large stove box Harry had drug over by the door. "It's better for everyone if no one sees you leave. We best make it quick. The lady wants you as soon as possible. Get in that box over there, hurry up." "But sir, my stuff." Harry began to argue, before drifting off as his uncle's face began to flush in anger again, the color rising up under his buttoned collar. He looked down at the floor, shuffling over towards the box. Uncle Vernon spoke behind him as he hesitated. "The woman will supply anything you need." His uncle gestured roughly to the box again, a tight, eager expression coming over his face. Harry hesitated only a second more, sparing a brief thought for the few possessions he had collected in his cupboard. Broken toys, select pieces of junk that were ignored by Dudley and his relatives. Nothing Harry could really value, but it was all he had. "Hurry up, boy, before I whip you first." Uncle Vernon snapped out the last bit and kicked his foot towards Harry, who quickly scampered into the large cardboard box. His breath sounded loud in the enclosed area, and he felt the world close in on him. It was like his cupboard, but not, a tight, suffocating feeling coming over him. His breath sped up as he heard his uncle taping up the top of the box, and he lay on the floor, curling up in a tight ball. He clasped his hands together, his palms sweaty, and screwed his eyes shut. Somehow, not being able to see the darkness made it more bearable. He felt the box being lifted onto a hand cart his uncle had retrieved from the garage. The sudden movement sent him sprawling back towards the back of the box, and he heard his uncle grunt at the shift in weight. He tried to hold himself still as the movement continued, focusing his thoughts on where he might be going. Maybe this new woman would be nice, and have cookies like Mrs. Figg across the street. He might even get a room of his own. The chores couldn't be much worse than the ones he did already, and he had always loved animals. He felt himself begin to calm as he built a picture in his mind. Everything was going to be fine. The box came to a sudden halt, and Harry felt his stomach drop as a voice sounded outside. "Hi, Mr. Dursley. You get a new dishwasher. I heard that new model over at Blake's was very nice. You need any help?" The voice came from the right, where their neighbor at number 5 lived. He waited, breath harsh, as his uncle nervously replied. "HMH, well, a little help getting this into the boot would be nice. It's heavier than I expected. Put some old beaten-in parts in here to carry them over to the dump." His uncle's voice wavered, and Harry could hear him rub his palms against his trousers. He heard footsteps coming closer, and tried to brace himself against the sides of the stiff cardboard. He was suddenly elevated, and felt himself fall over again as he was pushed forward roughly into the back of the car. He managed to withhold a yelp of surprise and sudden pain as pressure was put on his still, tender wrist. Then there was a sudden slam, and the grey light his eyes were just beginning to get used to turned completely black. He almost yelled in fright, but pressed his face against his hands instead. He hoped he would be getting out of here soon. The air was hot and stuffy, making the space seem even smaller. He heard some muffled voices, and then the car engine started, a low hum that vibrated under his body as he lay once more curled on his side. It suddenly jerked backwards, and he began to count in his mind. 1, 2, 3, 4. Trying to focus on anything except his situation, cramped and alone. Never once did he think his uncle was lying, or consider the legality and oddity of simply giving a child away. When the car suddenly braked and came to a halt, Harry had been drifting off to sleep. He heard the trunk open, and dim light once more filtered through to his eyes. He felt his heart jump in excitement, and he felt the box being lifted out of the trunk. He was in no way prepared for a sudden drop and the pain of hitting hard pavement. The box tumbled, he rolling inside it, and this time he did let out a yell as stars burst behind his eyes. He was now upside down in the taped box, and he tapped on the side, questioning. "Uncle Vernon." He dizzily listened to another slam, the trunk being closed, But instead of an answer or the box being opened, he instead heard tires squeal, the car leaving quickly. He beat on the side of the box, his soft calls soon turning into frenzied yells. Uncle Vernon, come back, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. Uncle Vernon, come back. He scratched and pulled at the cardboard and beat at the top, but it was completely sealed shut. He pushed upwards, straining, and felt a slight give. He pushed harder, encouraged, his mind racing. Where was he? What happened? He heard vague honking noises like cars on a street. That had to mean there were people nearby. He kept up his yelling, his voice turning hoarse. He continued to pry at the cardboard with his fingers and was only softly whispering his pleas to be let out when he heard sounds outside. Hey, look, some new boxes. His heart began to race again, and he frantically shook the box back and forth, trying to attract attention. Really? Hey, stop it. Guys, come back. We don't gotta go scruffing through boxes anymore. But we might get something good, and something extra can't hurt. The last voice was very close, and in excitement Harry rammed the side of the box and beat the sides, his voice low and muffled. The voices sounded young, but surely they could help get him out. There's something in here. Yeah, I heard it. Open it. Maybe it's a dog. Hurry up. Can't we keep it? If it's a dog, please. Tearing sounds came from the top of the box, and sudden light blinded Harry, who quickly ducked down and covered his head. His eyes burned from the onslaught, but his lungs gratefully sucked in the fresh air. Excited voices rang from above, seeming to come from every direction. Whoa, let me see. It's a kid. A baby. No, he's little, though. He wanted to protest that statement, but it only came out as a croak. The sound seemed to silence the voices for a second before a timid voice slowly whispered, Wow, what should we do? Get out of the way, let me see, an older voice. Harry slowly cracked open his eyes and squinted up at several dark blobs as they took shape, now peering at him over his head. He cleared his throat before trying to speak again. Hi. He paused, uncertain, before asking quietly, his throat painfully dry. Where am I? An excerpt from Memorable Muggle Mornings, The Undercover Wizard. It was as I was taking my customary walk about town that I first came across a small stray cat. It was quite pathetic looking, with not a hint of Kneazle anywhere about it. Stunted looking with a crooked tail and dusty grey fur matted all over it, I couldn't help but be revolted and charmed at the same time by its rustic and mugglish appearance. Not a thing magical about it, not even a twinkle in its eye. Of course, I had wondered how muggles take care or non-magical pets, and decided to immediately take it home and start putting it to rights again. However, I would never have expected the trouble one small, pathetic-looking stray could get into. It was a confused and lost Harry who looked around him when he was helped out of the large box. There were buildings taller than houses to either side of him, and trash was littered all over the ground. Not a patch of grass or suburban houses in sight. The smell was strong, and found himself having to resist the urge to cover his nose. He'd never seen the likes of it, this town. No, city. This was London. Seemed to be a very dirty place. He felt a shudder rack through him as he looked down at the box he had been cramped inside, stacked next to several large black trash bags and an ever larger pile of heaped aluminum trash cans. You okay? This came from a sandy-haired boy with a kind face and a smattering of freckles across his cheeks. He was the one who had told him he was in downtown London, in a back alley that usually was only frequented by homeless people, looking for food or valuables that might be in the trash that was sometimes dumped in the vicinity. The boy seemed to be the leader of the group that had found him. All the others hovered around the freckled boy and looked to him for cues on how to respond to finding a small boy trapped inside a taped-up box. I'm all right. Does a lady live near here? I'm supposed to be going to help a lady with her animals and stuff, Harry said, hope fluttering his stomach. Perhaps this was just a mistake, a lousy joke played on him by his uncle. What? And you're supposed to be delivered in an appliance box? The comment practically dripped in sarcasm and came from a mean-faced boy who looked older than all the others. He was tall and had short dark hair cropped almost military style. He stood with his arms crossed and eyes narrowed in Harry's direction. It was hate at first sight. Sandy Hair only rolled his eyes at the attitude. Stop that, Mike. Do you know her name? He turned back to him and asked. Harry began to shake his head and speak, but the boy named Mike interrupted again. You're so stupid. You don't actually believe you were going to some woman, did you? You were probably dumped here like most other people, probably for being so stupid. Mike, I said, stop it. Sandy Hair growled. Then he turned to Harry with pity in his eyes. My name is Care. I'm 17. That bully over there is Mike. He's 16. Care glared at the scowling boy, then turned and pointed at a small boy who looked about 10 years old and had yellowish blonde hair. The boy smiled brightly at Harry and waved a little. That's Tiny. He's the youngest of our gang at only 11 years old. He then turned and pointed at the last boy who had his hands in his pockets and was looking at the ground. He would not look up and meet Harry's eyes and shifted uneasily back and forth as if urgent to move on. And that over there is Rick. He doesn't talk a lot. We think he's 15 or 16, but he doesn't really know. What is your name? Before Harry could answer, he quickly asked again. And how old are you? Harry answered softly, feeling outnumbered by the boys and very intimidated by their appearance and especially Mike's attitude. What did he have against him anyway? I turned 8 last month. Harry felt like crawling back into the box as the other boy winced. And your name, baby? Mike spit out with a sneer. The boy's eyes were narrowed on him, suspicion lit in their depths. Harry. He mumbled quickly, looking away. He hated confrontation. What you call me? You little. Stop it. Care ordered sternly. Care glared at Mike and turned a kind eye back on Harry. Tiny was looking at him in open curiosity, tinged with a bit of mirth. Rick had finally looked up to meet his eyes before looking down quickly again. Care spoke up. He said his name was Harry. At that, Tiny sniggered and Mike just smirked and replied, He doesn't look Harry to me. They should have named him Skinny. Care glared at him again and then sighed, throwing his hands in the air. He then bent down in front of Harry. Look, whoever dropped you off here, we can help you find them. Rick shuffled uneasily. Mike grumbled under his breath. Will not. Or you can come and stay with. He is not staying with us. He is too little. Care and Mike turned to the source of the comment. This came oddly enough from the silent Rick. Rick had brown hair that he had kept hidden under a baseball cap, which he had just pulled off and was twisting anxiously in his hands. Rick continued, seeing Care's obstinate look. We have enough trouble with Tiny. This kid is too little to pull his own weight, and he can't be seen much on the street because he'll just get toted off by child services like Jenny did. After that, Rick crossed his arms and stuck his lip out stubbornly. Care looked at the stubborn Rick, then over at Mike, before finally looking at Harry. Care spoke up with a sigh. He's right, and you'll be better off with the services anyway, and who knows, you might even get a nice foster family. SSSH whatever, don't go giving him any silver lining. We all know that won't happen, Mike quickly interjected, looking over at Tiny. Tiny frowned and looked down. Apparently the boy had learned that fact the hard way. At that, Harry spoke up quickly. I can help. And how will you do that, Skinny? You don't even know what we do, Mike asked sarcastically. I can run very fast and climb trees and get into small places. Care, who was slowly shaking his head, interrupted Harry. We aren't exactly thieves or anything, mugging people and all that. We just deliver messages and spy on people, and sometimes we make distractions for them. In return, we get food and shelter. I guess running could come in handy, but I doubt you could run any faster than Tiny there, with you being so little. Problem is, a really little kid could get into trouble we can't get them out of, or get taken by services which might make them do another sweep of this area. At that, Care shook his head again decidedly. Rick and Mike nodded, though Tiny looked a bit disappointed. The boy would have loved another boy close to his own age. We will take you home, or to some place the police will pick you up. Care looked earnestly at him, but Harry didn't like the thought of returning to the Dursleys, or of going to some family called Foster, who was just as mean and bad. He spoke up, doing his best to keep his voice from wavering, but there was still a slight tremor at the edges. Please. Can I at least try? And if I mess up, then you can send me away, and I'll tell them that I got lost and never mention you or your friends. Both Rick and Mike looked like they didn't like the idea at all, and Tiny just shrugged his shoulders. Care looked skeptical. Harry then blurted out quickly before they could start talking about turning him into the police again. I'll race you, and if I win you will let me stay. At that, Mike laughed and said, We will we? Yeah, right. Okay. Care said, and immediately Mike and Rick started bickering. We can't. Too young. What are you thinking? Care frowned at the two of them before replying. Look, I don't think he can do it, but if by some miracle he does, then he will come in handy. And also, Mike, if I remember right, you couldn't have been much older than him when we met. You turned out fine. Care spoke the last with finality before turning to Harry. He nodded towards Rick. You can race Rick. He's faster than Tiny and me. Mike is the fastest, so you two will follow him for as long as you can. We will see if you can keep up. Care then turned and gave the Mike a hard stare, which the boy responded to by crossing his arms and smirking back. And Mike, don't try anything. Lead them the long way to Mr. Steele, and Tiny and me will meet you there. I expect young Harry here to not be seriously damaged. At that, Care smiled at Harry with some encouragement. You ready? Harry shook out his arms and froze for a second before nodding an affirmative. Before he'd even finished, Mike shot off with Rick on his tail. Harry blinked and then ran after them. Harry was tired. His legs felt numb and his arm was hurting fiercely. Mike had immediately rounded the corner, then bolted across the street, and a cab had almost hit Harry when he followed. The driver slammed on his horn and cursed him loudly, but as much as it scared Harry, he was also determined not to fail. Things got worse from there. They dashed through alleys almost too small to pass through, climbed over dumpsters, and at one point Mike had knocked over a bunch of plastic crates that Harry and Rick had to push through. It hadn't been easy, and it felt like he'd been running for hours. Mike was nowhere in sight, and Harry was seconds behind Rick, who had just turned a corner. As Harry ran around the corner, he stopped in amazement. It was a dead end. For a minute, Harry just stared before he heard a banging overhead and looked up to see Mike and Rick grinning down at him before their heads disappeared over the roof. He could hear them snickering. Then he saw the small black ladder to his left and immediately ran over and began climbing. He felt almost sick with defeat. Was this even worth it? Did he want to join these cruel boys? Could he even hope to catch up? When he reached the top and raced over to the other side, he saw that someone had rigged some boards at an incline between the building he was at and another roof. It was a steep slope, and Harry could already see the boys ahead climbing down a ladder on the other building. He only thought for a second before he jumped onto the boards and rushed down the wobbly surface. His legs were trembling even more when he started down the other ladder, and his wrist seemed made up of pure pain. It was only when he reached the bottom that he realized he had no idea which direction the others had went. For the first time since he had destroyed the Dursleys' kitchen, he felt tears run down his face. This was it. He had lost. They would just abandon him here, in the middle of London, even more lost than he had been before. Strong emotions surged up as Harry acknowledged the truth. The Dursleys had abandoned him on purpose. Planned it, even. And now, with another home almost within his grasp, acceptance waiting just out of reach, he wasn't wanted. Harry just wanted to win this race. Prove he could be more than just a freak, more than a useless waste of space. Harry wanted to belong. Harry leaned against the railing with a sob and felt a breeze whip through his hair when suddenly a loud popping noise caused him to whip his eyes open again. What he saw shocked him. He was on the ground. Only a pace ahead of him, Mike and Rick had their heads together laughing, and right across the street was a small store called Steele's Custom Furniture. Steele. That was the name the boys had mentioned earlier. This must be that place. Without a second thought to how he could have gotten there, he snuck around the boys and took off towards the store. "Hey!" Mike shouted. He had glimpsed Harry as he darted between people crossing the street. Rick heard his yell and turned around, eyes wide. That's him. Mike grabbed a hold of Rick's sleeve, giving him a hard tug. "Run!" Harry heard the shouts behind him and ran as fast as he could, throwing himself forward with all he had. He jerked open the store door just as a hand grabbed him by the shoulder and shoved him out of the way. As he fell to his knees, he was greeted with the sight of Care and Tiny standing beside a frail, stooped man with white hair. Care smiled triumphantly at him. Rick and Mike panted at Harry's sides, angry. Mike glared daggers at the young boy. "He cheated," he exclaimed. "There is no way he could have beaten me here. It's impossible." The old man looked between the two of them contemplatively. "Yes, it is quite impossible that he cheated. A lost boy left in London somehow found his way to my shop all by himself. Quite impossible. He must have followed you and raced forward when he saw the sign." The old man spoke, chuckling to himself before motioning Harry forward. "I am Mr. Steele, and these boys here are the steel wings that bear me in flight." Care rolled his eyes at the older man's fancy words. Harry just stared. Was this guy crazy? Just what had he got himself into? Care smiled at Harry and spoke. "Don't mind the old man's poetry. We are his delivery boys, his unofficial ones." Rick looked even more nervous at that, but Tiny puffed out his chest in pride. Care grinned and gave Harry a playful shove. If you do as well as you did today, you might just get to wear our name as well. We call ourselves the Steel Wings. It comes from a poem of the same name. Mike rolled his eyes before mumbling sullenly as he looked Harry over one more time in disgust, which I've never bothered to read. Rick spoke up finally, a petulant tone in his voice. And how is this fair? He's still little, and who is going to teach him anything? Mr. Steele spoke kindly, waving his cane towards a door, gesturing them to come inside. All in time, all in time. Take my new feather up to the loft. Give him some food. Put him up in Tiny's room, I suppose. Let him sleep until morning. I've got good work for my wings tonight. Mr. Steele smiled. Harry felt a smile coming over his face, relief echoing through his body. He knew to the depths of his soul that his life had just taken a drastic turn from what it might have been before. As he followed the boys of the stairs, his legs trembling from exertion, he couldn't help but wonder if it would be for the better or the worse. Once he smelled the food, he made up his mind. This was most definitely better. Tilda, review please. 2. There is he. Author's note. Many thanks to G.J. Mega for editing this. 2 excerpts from memorable Muggle mornings. The Undercover Wizard. It has chewed my shoes. It has shredded the curtains. It has peed and pooped and is in every way disgraceful. I came closer to using a spell than I have since starting this little experiment. I have to buy it food, and I had to take it to this Muggle animal nurse called a vet. They then stuck needles into it, looking highly painful, and several other things that I dare not mention for shuddering. It has no redeeming values, and I am quite certain I will need to dispose of it somehow. 1 week later, I was sitting in my favorite chair after a long day of strenuous Muggle yard work called weeding, when I heard that dreaded meow. Certain it was up to some act of mischief, I prepared to get up when the thing jumped straight into my lap. At first I thought it was growling and prepared myself for an attack, and then it curled up and I realized it was purring. Such a loud purr it was. I've decided to call it Perniscus. How very sweet. He's done it again, and I am not fixing it up this time. Mike ran down the stairs, yelling all the while. He was followed soon after by a glum Harry. Care sighed at yet another ruckus and resigned himself to simply waiting until Mike caught up to him at the front desk. He gave up watching the shop for any customers that might come in as the 2 younger kids took his attention. Mike glared at Care, which did not bother him the least. Harry withered at Care's questioning look. "I'm sorry, I just couldn't see it very well," he gasped, looking up with pleading eyes. "It was 2 freaking feet from your front nose. Skinny, whatcha mean you couldn't see it?" Mike crossed his arms and growled. It was clear to all that he was losing patience with Harry's clumsiness. He continued, voice low and full of heat. "I've shown you 1,000,000 times. The wooden bar has to be nailed straight across the penciled line, or the chair won't hold. And to make it worse, this is the 3rd time you've ruined an order because you can't follow simple directions." Harry looked pleadingly between Care and Mike. He had tried so hard to be a good worker, and did not want to do anything to make his new housemates angry. Maybe he just wasn't cut out for making anything, let alone something like chairs, where small mistakes were very noticeable. Harry had noticed the boys seemed to be doing things other than assembling custom-ordered furniture, often sleeping in late into the morning and staying up to all hours at night. That left Harry to do a lot of the orders himself, which had turned into one disaster after another. Harry shook his head, then spoke up when he saw Care's inquiring look. "I swear I couldn't see it. It needs to be darker or something. There wasn't a line there, I swear. I promise, go look for yourself," Harry demanded. Care frowned and turned to Mike, who threw up his hands and angrily shook his head. "I double-checked. The pencil was there clear as day, and it has to be something easy to cover up when we stain the wood so we can't mark it with freaking markers." Harry groaned, stomping one foot on the ground in frustration. "It wasn't." Care interrupted Harry before he could finish his defense, his eyes kind. "I believe you when you say you didn't see it. I've been wondering ever since you tripped right over that stool, and the fact that you have to hold any written instructions inches from your face. Have you ever been to an eye doctor?" "An eye doctor?" Confused, Harry shook his head. Care continued. "Well, that explains it then. I'm not sure how we can get you into one without questions being asked, though, and those doctors don't come cheap. I'll speak to Mister for you tonight." Mike, go back up there and redo that chair. It's got to be done by Saturday, and Mrs. Hopkins's table set hasn't even been started. Give Harry something to do that doesn't require excellent eyesight. He had bad eyesight. Harry could see the way he always had. What would happen to him now? Mike ushered a worried Harry back up the stairs, grumbling all the while. I knew you'd be trouble, Skinny, and now you're blind too. Harry gazed desperately back at Care for any sign of help, but the older boy's attention had drifted away from them without concern. Harry did not know what to think. For as long as he could remember, he had had trouble reading things far away, but he figured it was normal. Often he was called stupid simply because he had no idea what people were talking about. His aunt had always showed him how to cook and clean, never letting him use directions or a cookbook. Teachers avoided him because of comments made by his relatives. Outside of school, Harry rarely did any reading at all, and he was never allowed to play video games or watch TV. Was this really something that could be fixed? Would his eyesight just keep getting worse and worse? Was he going blind? Harry felt his breathing increase and tried to calm himself down. Care didn't seem too worried. Maybe everything would be all right, and if, somehow, he could see better, he could really earn his place here. Mike wouldn't be able to pick on him so much. That alone would be worth seeing a doctor. Harry glared at Mike's back as the older boy ushered him along. Why did the older boy hate him so much? Harry sat in a corner desk and quietly rubbed redwood stain into a newly completed chair. Yesterday marked his first week staying with the Steel Wings, and it hadn't gone smoothly. Though he had followed all the directions he had been given, and even cooked once when it was his turn, and all the boys, even Mike, had admitted that the food was very good. But he still kept making stupid mistakes when it came to putting the simple parts of wood together. Now he had basically been relegated to staining the furniture, a smelly, sticky job, and fetching tools. The Steel Wings lived in a loft on the third story above old Mr. Steele's, affectionately called Mr. by the boys, furniture shop. The second floor was a workroom station for making custom furniture and renovating old antiques. Care, Mike, and Rick were legally Mr. Steele's employees and were the only ones paid a small salary other than the simple food and place to live. What the boys did at night, Harry still didn't know the details of, and the odd errands Mr. Steele sent them on at random times during the day was a complete mystery. Harry also wasn't allowed up on the fourth floor with the other boys. Harry was beginning to wonder if Mr. Steele was up to something illegal, more illegal than harboring stray kids, anyway. Harry and Tiny were usually kept out of sight of any passerbys and weren't allowed downstairs unless it was checked first. If they were caught here, Mr. Steele could get in trouble for harboring runaways without reporting it to the police. Tiny sometimes got to go with the older boys, especially at night. He had heard Rick say to Tiny that he was a fast thinker the other morning, and Tiny had walked around beaming the whole day. Last night, Tiny had confided in Harry that once Harry was accepted as one of them, he could get their gang sign, which was 2 steel wings inked onto their shoulder blades. But when Harry asked to see Tiny's, the boy had refused and pretended to go to sleep when he insisted. Probably doesn't even have one, Harry muttered under his breath as he absently rubbed the liquid into the smooth wood under his fingers. What's that, Harry? Lamenting your blindness. This came from a grinning Rick as the brown-haired boy entered the room and sauntered over to a table and sat down. Harry was about to snap back before he reconsidered. This was Rick, who was much nicer to him than Mike, and not as intimidating as Care. If he was going to get some information, it would be from him. Harry spoke up, looking down. Rick, is it true that all you guys have tattoos? Did they hurt a lot? Rick laughed and nodded, and Harry glanced up as the boy helpfully passed him another cloth. Rick wasn't wearing his usual red baseball cap, and his hair stuck wildly in all directions, much like Harry's liked to do. Rick began to explain, looking over the work Harry had done so far. Yep, you get 1 wing after your first successful solo assignment, and your second once Mister considers you to be a good asset to our team. In other words, when you start getting paid. Rick leaned back in the chair. What assignments, Harry wondered. Does he mean the deliveries? Before Harry could get up the courage to ask, Rick spoke up again with a teasing tone. And it didn't hurt at all. Liar. The word brought both their attention around to the doorway. Care smiled as he walked in. If I remember right, you cried like a baby the whole time. Rick rolled his eyes, lightly shoving Care away as the boy neared. I did not. The two jostled a bit in fun before Care backed off and looked seriously at Harry. Harry sat up straight as he was fixed with the stern brown eyes, suddenly nervous. Care turned to Rick again, his tone dismissive. The shop is closed, and Mister will be here any time. I need you to go get Mike. For some reason, he isn't back yet from delivering those packages. Rick glanced at Harry and smiled in farewell, then stood up with a nod. He rose to his feet and casually left the room with a lazy stride. Care shook his head with a grin, then took Rick's abandoned seat and sat down facing Harry. Harry, realizing he had stopped polishing the wood, quickly got to work again as Care began to speak. The tattoos, no matter what anyone says, are very serious to us. Means you're with us for good, and that we are with you as well, through thick and thin. You're pretty smart for a kid, and you have a way of remembering things after only hearing it one time. But you're going to have to be something special if you want to stick with us long term. We've had a few people get the first wing and then leave. We've had even fewer people get both and then leave us. But we have had many boys, and even a few girls, who don't even try, or they just don't have the talent for our line of work. I think you might have what it takes, and that's why you're here. Harry nodded, though he had no idea just what kind of work the boys did. He spoke up with curiosity. What happened to those who earned both wings? Why would they ever leave? Care shrugged one shoulder, leaning back in his chair. Once you are part of us, you never really leave. Occasionally they come back for a special job or two, or just to visit. Mr. Steele considers us all his family, him never being able to have a family with his wife dying so young and all. As for why people leave, well, there's quite a few reasons. Most don't stick around once they reach 18 and don't need Mister's protection anymore. They go to other better paying jobs, get girlfriends, some even try and go to college. What we do for Mr. Steele is out of the ordinary. Some leave simply because they don't believe in it. I don't think we've ever had over 5 boys here at one time before. When one leaves, we look out for another recruit, but we don't actively seek any. I'm the oldest here at the moment. Clyde left after he asked a girl to marry him a year back. He was 32. Harry's eyes widened. Whoa, how long was he in Steel Wings? How long have you been in Steel Wings? Harry exclaimed. He had been about to ask why believing in it would having anything to do with a warm shelter and food in your belly when he had been distracted by that information. Surely someone who had stayed with Mr. Steele with so long would have to have a very good reason to leave. He supposed getting married was important, but he wouldn't know why. His aunt and uncle certainly were nice to each other, but Harry hadn't benefited from their kindness. Care smiled at Harry's amazement. He was with us since he was 13, and was one of the first boys Mr. Steele took in after finding he needed some younger help. That was before we were even called Steel Wings. I've been here since I was your age, about 8. I earned my first wing within only a month, but didn't get my second till I was 15. As Harry was about to eagerly ask more questions, there was the sound of feet running up the stairs and Tiny's blonde head peeked around the corner. His gaze found Care, and the young boy quickly spoke with excitement. Mister is here, said he read your note and wants to talk with you privately. Tiny said the last while looking pointedly at Harry, who had been about to follow Care down the stairs when the older boy stood. Harry tried to shrug it off and go sit back down nonchalantly, but inside, he was a ball of nerves. Would Mr. Steele not want him any more since he might need glasses? Would he even get the chance to go to a doctor? He didn't have any money, and he seriously doubted any of the other boys would lend him some from their personal savings so he could afford glasses. Harry looked down at the stained wood and his own dirty fingers with a sigh. Well, at least he was useful for something. About an hour later, Harry finished with his work for the day and trudged up to his temporary room he shared with Tiny. He sat on his bed and had no idea what to do with himself. He had already found that there wasn't much to do here besides work, and whatever it was, the boys got up to behind a locked area of the building. He had also saw that Tiny and Mike both had school books to work on that Mr. Steele had given them. Apparently, once you'd been accepted into the gang, you got homeschooled, or something of that nature. Harry didn't like the idea of schooling, but he supposed it would be worth it to stay. When he'd mentioned it to Rick the day before, the shy boy had vaguely mumbled that Mister don't want no dummies in his house, or something along that nature. Harry wondered if the fact that he hadn't been told anything about it was a sign that they weren't going to let him stay around. Harry wasn't even sure if he should stay anyway. No one but Care and maybe Tiny seemed to like him, and he'd never even talked once to Mr. Steele alone. He'd gathered that there were other groups in the area willing to harbor strays for a certain price. What that price was depended on who was asking, it seemed. The one time Harry had had the courage to ask, he quickly dropped the subject after getting some dirty looks from Rick and a slightly sick one from Tiny. Apparently the price was too high to mention. There was a brief knock on the door, and then Tiny sauntered into the spare room and motioned to Harry imperiously. "All right, come on. Mister wants to talk to you." Harry gulped, then got up and followed Tiny down to the bottom floor, and after crossing through the shop entered a door along the side wall. He had never been through here before, and had been told to not go in there and bother Mr. Steele, so he had assumed that this must be where he lived. His assumption was right. All along both sides of the room were shelves and shelves of books, floor to ceiling. Various dusty gadgets rested on shelves, and Harry could even see what looked like a telescope with a long tube attached to the end. "Hurry up," Tiny whispered. That jolted Harry out of his reverie as he realized he was lagging behind, gawking at the room. Harry nodded and turned his attention away from the clutter to follow the other boy. They continued on through the library-like room and into another room just as cluttered, but with papers and old computer equipment. Behind a desk in the right corner sat Mr. Steele, and across from him Care sat in a comfy-looking chair. There was an empty chair beside him, and Care motioned him to sit down. Tiny leaned against the doorway, looking intrigued as Mr. Steele ruffled through some papers and held up a long sheet. Harry noticed another 2 doors at the other end of the office, but before he could really look through the one open door, Mr. Steele spoke. "Read off this third line of letters for me, Harry. Off this sheet." Mr. Steele gently shook the stiff sheet of paper in his hand, filled with various sizes of letters on it, ranging from a huge letter E to some very fine print at the bottom. Harry squinted hard at the third line. A C-U-G, R-F-S, he stuttered over a few letters but thought he had gotten them right. Mr. Steele nodded to him, his voice encouraging. "Very good, very good. Now how about this bottom line, line 7? When Mr. Steele pointed at it with his hand, Harry tried his best, but there was no way. He could barely even tell they were letters as they blurred together into a grayish-black squiggle. Harry spoke up in a low voice, cringing. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't really tell. I think that's a G and R, maybe a R. I. Harry felt himself turning bright red as he struggled to see what was only a few feet in front of him. Beside him, Care shifted and gave him an encouraging look. He thought he heard a snicker from behind him and made himself not look back at Tiny. Mr. Steele smiled benevolently, lowering the sheet and clasping his hands. "That's enough, Harry. I can see the issue, and it appears you're nearsighted. Now, we can't just go out and buy you a pair of glasses. No, no, you will need a prescription." Mr. Steele sighed, but he picked himself up soon enough. When he spoke next, there was no sign of disappointment in his voice, signs Harry himself hadn't realized until now that he'd been desperately hoping to never find. It was not certain, but it was a start. "Now, Harry, how have you liked it with us so far? Getting along good with the boys?" Mr. Steele asked. At Harry's quick nod, yes, he continued. "Well, I've been talking with Care here, and both of us like your gumption. You've never once complained about anything, and you learn fast. This glasses thing, well, we can work around that for now. Perhaps, if your first assignment goes well, we can work out a bargain to cover the price of the—" Before Mr. Steele has finished, Harry blurted out a question, his heart hammering in excitement. "First assignment, so you're not kicking me out?" He immediately turned even more red and hunched down in the chair when he realized he had interrupted the older man. Mr. Steele only laughed. "Of course not. Why, I have glasses myself, don't I? And don't go thinking that's just because I'm old. I've had these since I was a little lad, only a little older than you." Harry shook his head, amazed. Mr. Steele smiled and continued. "Care is going to explain to you a bit of this business we have going on, behind closed doors, so to speak. You listen well and do as he says, and you'll be a pro in no time. That is all." Mr. Steele winked, then shooed them out of his office. Harry felt like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. With a lighter step he followed Care and Tiny back up the stairs, the younger boy pestering Care with questions. He couldn't wait to finally figure out what it was exactly that this group of boys did. An excerpt from Memorable Muggle Mornings, The Undercover Wizard. It is odd how the Muggle culture, while so different from ours, is almost a perfect mirror when it comes to certain things. Take communication, for instance. Both muggles and wizards have a slow means of communication. Ours by owl, theirs by personal delivery of other muggles, usually by these fast barks things. How they move is somewhat of a mystery to me still. In both of our cultures, you can pay more for faster delivery. Our hawk is their aeroplane. When it comes to instantaneous communication, though, I can't help but think they have us matched, or perhaps even surpass us. While we must hurry to a fireplace and hope the person we wish to contact is near their registered fireplace, they merely pull out this small hand-sized device called a telephone or mobile phone. The person they wish to contact would also have this device. In fact, nearly every muggle I see carries one around, even the children, and they speak through it to the other person. Truly amazing technology. Upon further research at a local muggle library, I read that they utilize radio waves, which sounds much like our own wizarding echo spells we utilize for our own wizarding wireless, which of course opens another train of thought, are muggles using magic? And if so, perhaps an even scarier thought, can their technology discover us? Care and Tiny lead Harry into an upstairs room, where Mike and Rick were sitting down playing some sort of board game. Care gave them a nod, smiling, to which Mike and Rick looked highly annoyed. "He stays?" Mike asked with a grumble. "Yes," Care answered, and then turned back to Harry with a wink. "So now it's time for you to know what it is we are doing here." Harry fidgeted a bit, but took a seat. He was dying to ask all the questions brimming inside him. Care grinned, glanced at the other three boys, then began what promised to be a long story. Mr. Steele had, in the early days after his wife had passed away, encountered an odd and most unusual phenomenon. Being the philosophical sort needing a distraction as well as curious enough for a room full of cats, he had noticed, while waiting at his usual bus stop, that certain people would seem to enter a back alley, while others never noticed the alley at all. Over several days, he also saw that all the people who entered the alley wore long, dressed like thick robes, and tended to wear the funniest pointed hats. One day, he made up his mind to approach this alley. Right as he stepped on the curve, he caught a glimpse of an odd, dingy-looking pub, and then he was in his kitchen drinking tea. He distinctly remembered deciding abruptly that he wanted tea and had walked all the way home. The next day, he tried again to enter the alley, only to once more get a strong desire for afternoon tea. It didn't take a third attempt to realize that something mysterious was up. He continued his experiments. How close could he get before he wanted tea? Could he go from the side? What about the store next to the alley? It was then, as he was performing another such experiment, when he saw one of the funny-dressed people drop a newspaper. Curious to see what it was, he swiped the newspaper and quickly walked home. What he saw shocked him. The pictures appeared to be moving. He could find no scientific explanation, and together with one of his colleagues whom he shared the story with, they began to search for more cast-off papers. He also began to write down all the experiments he had performed and a detailed observation of the newspaper artifact, including the articles it contained. And such articles. Talking about things that didn't exist, like dragons and wands and magic. It must be some sort of code. He wrote down everything, even drew a few sketches, and it was this that saved him from being sure he was mad. One day he came home, feeling slightly out of sorts and a tad lost. He couldn't quite remember what he had done that day, only that he knew it had been normal. It was odd enough to his organized mind that this had happened. Even more odd was a journal he couldn't quite remember opened on his desk, and it was filled with his own handwriting. After reading the journal, he was shocked to see all these things he did not remember doing. The alley, the newspaper, which he later found was missing from his coat pocket, and the last entry he had written had been a hurried explanation that he was heading to a particular bookstore that might contain more clues about these mysterious people. He immediately contacted his colleague, found that his memory too must have been altered, and that was when he came to his conclusion. Some group, perhaps even from the government, possessed some sort of science that they were hiding from the citizens of Britain and even the world, and it was his duty to expose them. Such technology that was casually mentioned in the newspaper would help many people in their daily lives. This underground group had their own society that they selfishly hid from everyone else, and if the government didn't know about it, well, he would make sure they did. Why did they even pay taxes? His questions went on, and he couldn't help but wonder how much research he might have lost that he hadn't bothered to write down in his journal. It was almost exactly a year after his discovery of the newspaper, and that was when he decided to get help. He needed someone most people wouldn't pay attention to, and that nobody would be looking for. Someone who would work closely with him to find these people, discover their secret, and tell the world about their existence. His obvious choice was homeless people who needed a place to stay, and in particular, children. He told himself his wife would be proud of him for taking them in any ways, and that it was only natural to ask a little help in return with his research. "So what do you guys do then, for Mr. Steele?" Harry blurted as Kerr stopped his story to get a glass of pop. Mike and Rick shushed him, and Harry squirmed. Something about this story, about these people in particular, seemed almost familiar, especially the description of moving pictures. Kerr cleared his throat and continued. The first few people Mr. Steele had helping him with his research were useless. They didn't believe him at the best of times, since his one shred of proof, the newspaper, was gone, and actively argued with him and thought he needed help at the worst. Mr. Steele eventually found that it was easier to start with younger kids, below the age of 12, who also hadn't been on the streets very long and were open to new ideas. It was one such kid who found the next big discovery. It happened more than 10 years ago. Clyde was a small boy for his age, but quick and clever. He also had a knack for getting out of trouble. One such day, as he was going through some trash bins behind a shop that was on their suspicious activity list, a tall, black-haired man came sweeping out of the shop. "You there, what are you doing?" Clyde did exactly what any kid would do. He ran. "Stop!" There was a swooshing noise, and an odd ball of red-colored light smacked the wall to his left. He glanced back quickly, saw the man holding a short stick, then scampered through an alley and ducked under a trash can. "Did you find him?" This was another voice, and he couldn't see who his was from where he was hiding. No, little Muggle was too fast. The voice was close, very close. Clyde held his breath. "Ah, well, we need to move again anyway. Did you find anything for the Dark Lord?" No, the rumor was most definitely contrived. All there was were a few books on basic herbology and magical creatures. Nothing at all useful about how to create magical creatures like Rassels. We will need to look elsewhere. There was a thump above Clyde, like a package was cast down. "Incendio, let's try the next one. Point 3, the blue X." With the last word, there was a loud cracking noise, then nothing. Ever since the weird Indindi word, Clyde had begun feeling oppressive heat. Suddenly smelling burnt paper, he darted out from under the bin and looked quickly around. They were gone. He turned behind him. There were several books burning in the bin, and without thinking much further, he darted in and tried to pull several from the flames. He managed to salvage 2 books. Their titles read, 1001 Reasons to Harvest Magical Herbs and the Most Dangerous and Valuable Magical Creatures. The books, after close study and recopying by Mr. Steele, began to change his idea a bit about the identity and motives of these odd people. First, they called themselves wizards, and the weird guns, wands. These code words seemed so obvious. It was no wonder people thought they didn't exist. They seemed like something from a children's book. Another theory of the motive to these people also began to take root in Mr. Steele's mind. After realizing the extent of the cover-up, how whole species of plants and animals were being hidden from the public, and that most of these plants and animals had properties to them that could cure almost any ailment and perform most wonderful effects. It must be money and greed. Why, these people had at their fingertips plants whose leaves could help heal broken bones in a matter of minutes. Imagine how much people would pay for such potions. The more Mr. Steele thought about it, the more it made sense, and the more determined he was to bring them to justice. Kerr paused in his story, then smiled at Harry. "I know this sounds far-fetched and downright odd. Let me show you our collection." He got up, and the others followed him up the stairs to the 4th floor, then into another room, to a door Harry had barely noticed. It was almost hidden behind a corner of a bookshelf and table. Tiny was practically bouncing. Harry entered the room and felt his eyes widen. The room was full of shelves and shelves of weird devices and books. Some of the devices did impossible things, like shine without any source of light, or change suddenly into totally different objects. Some were locked in steel cages, which they occasionally banged against as if trying to escape. There were pictures on one space of wall, and in every one, the people and animals moved. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Kerr asked. He laughed in delight. We've come a long way since those first books. With every discovery, we learn more about these people, and it becomes easier to find artifacts. I myself found one of the more useful ones. It was how I earned my first wing. Kerr reached out and pulled a book off the shelf, then handed it to Harry. Before you can help us keep looking for more information and items you need to learn about these people, read their books. We have almost 30 here now. Also, you need to study the maps we have made of London and where we have found items and where known wizard locations are. Don't forget about what happened to Mr. Steele. If you get caught, you won't even remember it, and it could lead them back to us. In all this time, only once more have they caught us, but we were lucky. We had made copies of what they took from us, and the items they recovered were not our true treasures. So these here, Harry pointed around the room. We have even more. Yep. But you can start with these. Maybe once you've been with us a while, once you learn some stuff, we can show you where the really hardcore technology they've created is. Don't feel bad. Tiny here hasn't seen it yet either. Kerr said after seeing Harry's down expression. Tiny nodded and smirked. But I will see it soon. Mike laughed and playfully bumped into Tiny. You will if you keep it up. He found some cool stuff last week that we are still looking over, trying to see what it is. One thing we've also learned is to be careful. Some of the items, well, they are dangerous. They can hurt you in the most painful ways. For a second, Mike glanced over at Rick, who looked haunted. Harry felt as if his head was spinning at all this new information, that there was a world out there he never knew about, and yet... Hey, Skinny, you going deaf too? Come on. Mike growled at Harry, and he realized that the others had been filing out of the room and back towards the dining room. His stomach growled, and he reflected that he could start reading the book after dinner. He glanced at the title, Wizarding Society, 777 Ways to Fulfill Your Dreams. Mr. Steele leaned back in his chair wearily. Late at night, he tried not to count the years and wonder if all he had done so far was worth it. What was he supposed to measure his life against? What was his great achievement? Would he ever succeed in cracking into the hard shell of this mysterious hidden world? Even if he did, would anything at all come of it? With merely one spell, all he had done would be eradicated. It would be so easy for one small mistake to topple the house of cards he had built here. Still, the benefits, if he were to succeed in harnessing this technology, or if he could just get some magical specimens. The plants alone, to cure cancer. But who on earth would believe him? Mr. Steele again felt the crushing weight of inadequacy. He had come to the conclusion some time ago that there must be officials in the government who were aware of the phenomenon. If even someone like himself could stumble upon the secret world, who else had? Hundreds surely, if not thousands. Someone had to be also keeping tags on the mundane side of things. All his research could come to naught if he told the wrong person about his discoveries. What would happen to the children? With that last despairing thought, Mr. Steele abruptly stood up and walked into another room and over to a cabinet. As his hand touched the handle, he asked himself again, was it truly worth it? Tilda review, please. 3. Who made the bright sky? Author's note. Many thanks to G.J. Mega for editing this. An excerpt from Memorable Muggle Mornings, The Undercover Wizard. It is pretty common knowledge that muggles tend to explain away any oddness with some dull or drab explanation, even if that explanation is an obvious stretch of the truth. What did surprise me, however, is the outcome of several of my talks about my muggle experiences with my wizard acquaintances. Wizards are just as likely to think nothing of the odd things muggles do without seeking the real meaning. Over the next few weeks, most of the things Harry read seemed to resonate inside his mind. Like when he read about the flu network, and he got a brief image of green flames, even though he didn't find out until 2 books later that flu flames were not normal red-colored, but green from flame protection spells in the flu powder. It made his head hurt. It was bothering him. Then one day, when he was looking over the objects that had been collected, he picked up a clear glass ball whose effects had yet to be determined, and it had swirled with cloudy colors that slowly turned red. He quickly put it down, and from that day on avoided the room unless totally necessary. The things in that room just made him feel like a freak again. He was only just now starting to fit in with the other boys, and he didn't want to lose the only friends he'd made by doing something weird. By the end of his second month, with the group, he had finally finished reading the materials deemed necessary and had discussed them with the other boys. They all had different opinions on their mission. Were these people hiding from greed, as Mr. Steele seemed to think, or to protect something? Rick seemed to be of the opinion that the government was working with them, and that all the things they were protecting were probably rare and almost extinct. When he got to that part, Mike interrupted him with a snide remark. Explain the dragon population records in that big black book. Nothing there hints at any threat of extinction. Well, maybe they want to protect us. What can we do against a dragon? Rick argued back with equal vehemence, the hat on his head skewed slightly to the side as he ran a hand through his brown hair. Mike rolled his eyes. Ever seen a big gun, dummy? A rocket? Missiles? We could so take down a big, flimsy, flying lizard. Rick scoffed, the normally shy boy animated with the argument. The book says their scales are impossible to penetrate, and Harry tuned them out as the argument deviated from there. The boys tossed around what information they had read, but when it came down to it, they were all scared to death of meeting a real wizard face to face, much less any magical creatures. And despite what Mike said, Harry had trouble seeing the average person facing down a dragon of all things, even with a big gun. Care had told him to keep his mind open. Every discovery brought up new challenges and ideas and information about these wizards. Harry was to learn all he could and remember that there was an unlimited amount of information out there, just waiting to be found. Finally, he was told that he could begin to search himself. He would be escorted just like Tiny to several places they'd found where magical things tended to be left. They were all near areas heavily trafficked by the wizards. Harry was excited and more than a little nervous. He'd been warned way more than once about not getting caught and to always avoid the lasers that the wizards could shoot from their stick guns called wands. You ready? His sandy hair slicked back. Care smiled at Harry, who could only widen his eyes when he turned to see the older boy. It was around 11 at night, and the air was chilly. I get to go with you. Harry was sure he would be paired with one of the other boys. Care always seemed so busy, much too busy to escort the newest recruit around town. Care grinned. Yep, I like to go out with you all the first time. Make sure you know how to do this the right way. Now, what are the 3 rules? Now that was something he knew. Harry has been drilled in it the last few hours. Be quick, quiet, and don't get caught. Harry chirped, adopting Mike's sneer. Care laughed at the impression. That's right. Now look at the map. We're going to the far side, gonna check around a bit from the roof of this building here, and then we approach from this back alley. You will be my lookout when I check the back. We haven't been here in a while since Rick thinks he was spotted last time. There is sure to be something there that we can use. Now, what do you remember about this site? Harry looked at the map, searched his memory, and then replied hesitantly. We think it is some form of hotel for their kind, with entrances to 2 protected areas that might be a bookstore and a candy store based on the items we have found. Care nodded, his brown eyes gleaming with pride. Exactly. He then reached out and pointed to 2 grayed-out areas adjacent to the site. Now, just as a reminder, if we get separated, don't go near these 2 alleys. Both have memory buffers that will send you back to base with no idea you ever even went out. Harry nodded. He had already memorized the various memory buffers, but he appreciated Care's reminder. The wizards tended to think horizontally with their spells. They rarely put buffers on ladders coming down from roofs, as most people approached on foot from the main road. This made a perfect way to get up close to a wizarding space. Sometimes, you could even go around a memory buffer by going up the opposite side of the building, crossing the roof, then climbing down. Harry was brought out of his thoughts as Care grabbed 2 bags, then passed him one to sling over his shoulder. Well, let's head out. Harry hadn't been outside the building for more than a brief walk since he first joined the group. It was dark outside, with the streetlights casting bright spots along the highways. Mostly, they stuck to back alleys. Harry tried to hold the map in his mind as they went along, keeping track of where they were. It took almost 30 minutes of fast jogging to get there. Care motioned up a ladder in front of an old brown building, and he quickly followed him up to the roof. They looked down into an oddly normal alley behind another old building. Care leaned in to whisper close to Harry's ear. Now we have a specific route to get down there. Down the ladders on this side, Then we crawl behind those two bins. You then wait there and make the signal if you see anyone, and I mean anyone, come out of that building." The signal was an owl hoot, which Mr. Steele figured was perfectly ironic, considering the people's frequent mention of Owl Post. Harry then carefully and quietly followed Care down into the pitch-black darkness. It was slow going, and at times it became hard to see where the next step was. When they finally reached the bottom, Harry was shaking slightly as they ducked behind the dumpsters. Care made eye contact and nodded. Harry nodded back and sat back on his heels as Care quickly sprinted across to the other side of the alley and crouched down to look through the boxes stacked up behind the building. They had explained the process to Harry before. When they had first started the search in teams, they had gone through garbage. This was an extremely hard way to find anything, because as they had found out, the wizards would give a fine to anyone who threw away magical artifacts where normal people might find them. It was a streak of luck when, several years ago, a boy had noticed a strange occurrence. At exactly 11 o'clock, a pile of boxes appeared from thin air behind a known site. Once the boy told Mr. Steele about this, the boys were sent to watch the sites one by one all night to see if this was a one-time occurrence. It wasn't. Between 11 and 1 o'clock, several times a week, boxes would appear from thin air at many of the locations. In the early hours of the morning, someone would come out, grab the boxes, and take them inside. Eventually, Mr. Steele, after observing the phenomenon for himself, came to several conclusions. Apparently a creature that could fly, but that they themselves could not see, delivered the boxes. While this creature had the boxes in its possession, they couldn't see the boxes either. However, as soon as the creatures dropped off the boxes, they became visible. To the casual observer, this could easily be explained away as not noticing the boxes were there in the first place. You would have to know, and be looking, to even notice at all. As for what this creature was, well, they weren't sure. There was no way they could use normal owls as they implied, unless there really was magic. How could they train them where to go, and how could they carry such heavy parcels? Mr. Steele was of the opinion that they were either some form of robot or merely some type of portal. Harry, who kept getting an image of a small striped grey owl with glowing yellow eyes named Floofly, liked to think they really were trained owls. It was much more cool than super robots. To him, at least. Ever since making this discovery, the Steel Wings had become much more prosperous. They had found dozens more artifacts by merely stealing a box or two every once in a while and taking them to Mr. Steele. As long as they were careful and didn't take from the same place too often, they were relatively sure not to get caught. And as Mike said, it sure beat going through dumpsters. Harry watched as Care picked a smaller box about palm-sized, then another rectangular one before stuffing them in his backpack and hurrying back. On their long way back to base, his thoughts were full of what new discovery they might have made. "Candy?" Harry asked. He was thoroughly disappointed. "Yep. And unfortunately one we've already seen before," Care announced with a sigh. He was putting the rectangular box aside and beginning to open the smaller one. Harry looked at the candy's packaging. "Birdie Bart's every flavor beans doesn't sound very magical to me." "Oh, it is," Care insisted. "When they say every flavor, they really mean it. Tiny got one that he swears tasted like cat food. We all know to stay away from that stuff, though Mr. Steele likes to eat them. Says he got a most wondrous cheesecake flavor one once. Not worth it to me. I got one that tasted like old lettuce," Mike said. Harry turned when Mike entered the room, but turned his attention back to the pile of mysterious stuff at hand not long afterwards. He was dying to know what it was. Mike slumped into a chair, observing Harry and Care go through their takings for the day. "Anything good?" Care squinted down at the small box. "Not sure. This looks like some sort of jewelry, maybe earrings. We'd better wait for Mr. Steele to look it over first." At Harry's confused expression, Care turned to him and explained further. "We've found that a lot of jewelry does odd things when we touch it. Some of them give you bad headaches or rashes. One burnt up Luke, a boy that used to be here, very badly. It's better to wait and carefully examine it first when Mr. Steele is here in case anything goes wrong. He knows more about this stuff than we do." "How?" Harry asked. "I thought you and Mike and Rick all have seen the other stuff." Care shrugged his shoulders. "No, not really. Some of the books only Mr. Steele has seen, And if he doesn't think we should see it, I believe him. Some of the things we have found, well, they just feel evil." "Oh," Harry mumbled. He felt another echo in his mind. Evil. Dark. Why would the dark be evil? He wasn't a baby anymore. Harry shook the odd thoughts from his mind. It was late at night, almost 2 o'clock, and Care ushered Harry and Mike to bed. Harry followed his orders obediently, while Mike did it with grudging acceptance because he still wanted to see what they had got now. "Harry, sleep as long as you want tomorrow. I doubt Mister will look at the jewelry until tomorrow afternoon at the earliest," Care said. Harry nodded, then trudged to bed. He knew he needed to do some work in the shop tomorrow, too. They had just got a rush order in for another whole dining room set, and they would need all the boys working on it to get it finished in time. He might as well sleep as long as possible, since he was banned from building anything until he was able to get some glasses. His job would again be to stain the finished wood and lay out the large pieces. At this rate, his hands were going to turn permanently brown. The jewelry ended up being nothing special. Mr. Steele could find nothing in the least unique about it. Plain old earrings. The older man announced after studying it for some time. "We could probably resell it for some extra cash. These look to be real stones." He handed the box to Care, who glanced at Harry and then back to Mr. Steele. "Think they might cover the cost of getting Harry to the eye doctor?" Care asked idly. Harry stared at Care in complete surprise before turning back to Mr. Steele with hope brimming in his heart. Mr. Steele chuckled. Well, perhaps. Got to sell them first." Harry felt himself about to burst with excitement as he followed Care from the room. "Would you really? Give the money for my glasses?" Harry blurted. Care grinned. "Sure thing. Can't have my lookout being blind now, can I?" He laughed at the way Harry's eyes boggled at his statement, while the smaller boy was dumbfounded at the ease that Care trusted him. Harry thought he had gotten more smiles in the short time he had lived with Mr. Steele than he had in all the years of his short life before that. It didn't sadden Harry much, because he didn't know that there was any other way of growing up. "Besides, I have a feeling that you'll more than pay me back later on. Now go on upstairs while I run over to the pawn shop and see if I can figure out a way to get you to an eye doctor." Care patted his shoulders. Harry rushed up the stairs to tell Tiny the good news. It took a bit of work, but Care was able to find an eye doctor who would check Harry's eyes with no questions asked. At least, that's what he told Harry. He had a feeling that money was probably involved. For all the trouble, the procedure was relatively simple. He merely looked through different lenses till he could clearly read letters on a wall. Once that was done, he and Care picked out a simple pair of frames and were told to wait a few minutes till they were done. When the doctor came back in and fit Harry for glasses, he looked over at Care with a serious expression. "You happy?" Care nodded firmly. "Yes, sir, very happy." To Harry's eyes, the doctor looked relieved at that, even if he was still serious. "Good. That Steele is a crazy old man, but he does good work. These benches here are from his store." The man paused, glancing from Harry to Care and back. "You two take care. Steele has a heart of gold, I know. He means well. But you just tell me if you need anything else, all right?" Care looked uncomfortable, but he quickly nodded and ushered Harry out of the room. When Harry left the store, he felt like a new person. He could see things he hadn't even knew he had missed. There were birds perched on wires across the street, and graffiti splashed across walls. The detail was astounding. Harry wondered how he had even gotten around at all without the world being so clear. He looked everywhere, taking in the details, until Care laughed and told him he looked like his eyes were going to pop out of his head. When they got back to the place, Mike grabbed him and told him to go up and try again to put a chair together. "Let's see if not having those fancy glasses of yours was the reason you were so clumsy." Mike grumbled before sitting in a corner to work on an ornate rosewood table. Harry was amazed at how easy it all was. The lines he had sworn hadn't been there spider-webbed across the surface in pencil, and it was only a matter of time for him to put the braces into place. When he was done, Mike reluctantly nodded and told him he had done a decent job. "Now run off before I decide you need to stain it too." Harry scampered out, determined that he would see if there was anything he hadn't noticed about this new place he was living in when he didn't have glasses. He entered his and Tiny's room. Tiny was sitting on the bed reading a comic book. Tiny looked up and Harry showed him his new glasses. "They look nice," Tiny exclaimed, his own blue eyes gleaming earnestly. They talked a bit until Harry noticed that Tiny kept staring at him and then quickly looking away. What's wrong? Harry asked. Tiny seemed to be embarrassed that Harry had noticed him staring at all, which confused Harry even more. Tiny shook his head. Oh, nothing, it's just, come on, ask. Harry insisted. He saw how Tiny was steadfastly only glancing at Harry once or twice, keeping his eyes off his friend. Well, normally we don't ask about these things, they're personal. Even Mike doesn't. Tiny mumbled. Harry's forehead wrinkled in thought. Tiny didn't normally act this way, normally being full of energy and little tact. Ask about what kind of things? Well, scars. Harry suddenly understood and realized his new glasses probably held his hair to the side, showing the odd scar on his forehead more prominently. Before he could say anything, Tiny quickly interrupted. You ain't gotta tell me anything. We all got 'em. Hazard of the streets, I guess. And the things that bring you to the streets. It's just yours looks so, well, I don't know, planned or like it was done on purpose or something. I mean, you know what I mean, it looks like. Harry took pity on the boy as he stumbled over his words and interrupted him. Lighting, yeah, I know, I got it. You ain't gotta say, Tiny blurted out. I shouldn't have asked at all. It's okay. Harry reassured him, looking down as he continued. I got it before I can remember. My parents died in a car crash, and somehow I got this scar when we crashed. I think it was glass. Tiny nodded quickly, trying not to look skeptical. Yeah, that makes sense. Perfect sense. He nodded again, and then looked hard at his comic book. Harry took the hint that the conversation was over and walked back over to his bed. He got the distinct feeling that Tiny didn't believe him in the least. Well, it was the truth. He couldn't remember getting the odd-shaped scar, but he had seen glass cut people before, and it was usually jagged-shaped. Ah, well, it didn't matter. That was years ago, and none of it really mattered today. Things changed for Harry after that first time out with Care. He was almost drawn to the magical sights, and he never got lost finding his way around the city, even when he was separated from Mike one time out. Before he knew it, he was the one allowed to creep forward and grab a few boxes, and it only took 2 such times to figure out that the objects Harry brought back were, well, different. String of missing objects reported throughout London Daily Prophet, page 3, by Gloria Rosehip. It seems that Owl Post has gotten less reliable lately. Over the last year, reports of missing packages have greatly increased over the London area. Despite the new sticking charms, owls have been losing packages here and there, at one point as often as 5 times in 1 month. This is an outrage to the good witches and wizards of London who would like to rely on Owl Post. What is to blame, you ask? The owls, the charms, dark creatures. We here at the Daily Prophet are proud to say we have found the cause. Wards. The ministry has always been fond of boasting on the clear regulations and enforcements regarding wards. However, lately it seems certain wizards of ill repute have been putting up illegal wards left and right. We would like to remind these wizards that owls are highly sensitive to magical disruptions, and upon encountering an unknown ward will occasionally lose their senses and their packages. If you care for your owl and your post, you will follow ministry guidelines and report any and all wards you have currently and plan to place in the future. If you have any questions, please see the following question and answer session with Hilda Valesnit of the department for Cont page 11C. The objects were reaching out to him. The first time Harry crept forward, he didn't think much of it. He just felt inclined to grab that particular box at the top, and none of the others felt like being worth grabbing. When he got back and opened the box in excitement, he saw a very expensive-looking dagger. 2 snakes twined around the top, and the hilt was set with bright red rubies. The eyes almost looked alive, and for a moment Harry froze, expecting the thing to come to life and bite him. Then it wore off, and he found himself disappointed. It was just a dagger, albeit an extremely ornate and odd one. However, when Mr. Steele saw it, he practically levitated in excitement. Finally, to see one right before my eyes. Mr. Steele began to reach out to take it from Harry's hand, then jerked his hand back. He shook his head with a surprising amount of determination. No, no, better not. He turned and looked at Harry. For a second, he seemed about to say something, perhaps explain the purpose of the dagger. His eyes flickered between the steel and Harry's face before he abruptly shook his head and smiled. This is very, very good, son. Very good. I've been hoping that you boys would find one someday. These daggers were described in great detail in one of the books I have. A dark, dark book, all about wizarding rituals that use, Well, no matter. See these small knobs around the base of the blade and along the dull end, and this tiny snake engraved on the steel here with wings and a mane. It's a magical Quetzalcoatl, a flying snake. Each ritual knife is distinguished from all others by a representation of magic. It's very distinctive. All of them are unique and custom-made. Harry was still confused at how this could be useful, but Mr. Steele wasn't very inclined to share any true details about what the blade could do. He wouldn't even touch it, but had Harry place it back in the box, then lifted the whole thing up and quickly went back to his office after giving Harry a congratulatory smile. Harry felt an odd pang at seeing the thing taken from him and shook it off. Mike sulked in the corner. "Beginner's luck," he muttered under his breath. Harry frowned. Beside him, Kerr gave Mike a glare and a scathing reprimand. "Don't think I'm going to let you get away with leaving him. You were supposed to wait, and instead you just scampered back here with that big grin on your face. Serves you right that he actually found something." Kerr turned back to Harry with an encouraging smile. "Beginner's luck or not, why don't you go out again tomorrow night? It's about time we revisit another site over on the west side. Last few times we haven't got anything good, but it's been over a month since we've tried." Harry nodded, feeling butterflies in his stomach. Another time out, and so soon. He was so happy he had managed to actually find something worthwhile to the group. He hoped he could find more. Mike couldn't gripe then. "Will Mike be going with me again?" he asked in a small voice. Harry wasn't sure he wanted to trust the surly boy to be his guard after he had already been left once. "Number Rick will be your watcher. Now off you go to bed." Kerr dismissed him. Then he turned back to Mike with a scowl. "This is the last time I'm going to tolerate you." Harry closed the door behind him, grinning at the thought of Mike getting a good talking to. The boy seemed to have a grudge against him, and for the life of him he couldn't quite figure out why. When Harry slowly approached the pile of boxes, it took him a few seconds to realize that he was being tugged. It was very subtle. It was almost like moving towards one area felt smoother, more magical. As if turning away would make his fingers feel numb, his feet slow and rough, and the world would lose a little bit of its luster. His fingers reached of their own accord for another package, wrapped in crinkly paper and bound about with fraying string. It looked like it had been covered ages ago and put away in storage and forgotten, only to be mailed out as an afterthought. It looked like pure rubbish. Yet, Harry's eyes began to drift shut, his fingers tightening about the package, his mind drifting to something. Something right out of reach, something dull and blurry calling to him, and all he would need to do was say the words and the door would open and he would see. "Harry, Harry," Rick's voice whispered fervently from nearby. "Harry, get back here, snap out of it." Harry dropped the package with a loud thump. Rick cursed and quickly grabbed it when it had gotten so close, before turning and scrambling back the way they had come. For a second Harry felt out of breath, before a sound behind him prompted him to run after Rick. He didn't dare look back for fear they had been caught. When he caught up to Rick a few blocks later, the boy was glaring at him. "What were you thinking? You don't freaking daydream in their territory. We could have been caught. You better hope this thing is worth something or you are in big trouble." The boy scowled and turned away. Harry felt his shoulders sag as they returned to the shop. What had happened? Mr. Steele seemed deep in thought. He had been in the room with the artifacts when they had returned, looking over some books on wizarding animals to try and find out more about the Quetzalcoatl carved on the dagger. When Rick saw him, he immediately started venting about Harry's mistake. Harry hung his head, his stomach queasy. It had been such a stupid thing to do, and he couldn't fathom how it had happened at all. Mr. Steele frowned as Rick spoke, and then cut him off, his eyes locked on the package. "Let me see this package." Rick frowned and slapped it on the table, earning an angry look from Mr. Steele. "Do not let your anger cause you to damage something that could be of use." Rick tugged off his cap, swinging it in frustration as he retorted. "That dolt already dropped it. And did I mention we almost got caught?" Harry suddenly realized that Rick was acting not just out of anger. The boy was deathly afraid, his skin pale and his fingers shaking. Mr. Steele seemed to come to the same conclusion. He sighed and softly spoke. "Sit down, Rick. You didn't get caught, or you wouldn't be here now, and especially not with this. Next time, Harry will know to be more careful and not get overconfident." Harry wanted to deny that and tell what had really happened to him, but Mr. Steele had already turned back to the package and began removing the paper. Harry couldn't see what it was at first. Then Mr. Steele carefully lifted it up, and he could make out that it was a crude and roughly circular box. It looked like someone had taken an axe and just hewn the shape out of a piece of wood. It seemed to be stained a dark brown, though in places you could see the lighter, more natural wood color underneath. Mr. Steele was holding his breath. Was this blood? Yes, what else could it be? It looked like the box had been splattered in blood over and over and then left to dry. He had never been gladder to be wearing gloves. Trying to gather his composure, he looked over at the two boys. Rick was still pale and seemed to have no idea what it was he had carried to the house. Harry looked like a mixture of confusion, anger, and fear. Mr. Steele wondered if the boy had somehow known what this was, or perhaps felt it. This box had a purpose, a dark one. And was it any coincidence that Harry, on his first two tries, had brought back two of the darkest objects they had found yet? First, that dagger, meant to be used in various blood rituals, with its patron symbol a snake that represented superiority and freedom at any cost. Costs that often involved unwilling blood donors. Now this box, and who knew what was inside it? He certainly wasn't going to open it in front of the two boys. He had learned to err on the side of caution, and both looked scared enough as it was. After he sent the two away, with a long look at Harry and some platitudes to Rick, he carefully rewrapped the box and took it through his office into the back room where he kept the more dangerous objects. When he had first started his research, he had been afraid of these people with their technology and secrets. Over the years, he had learned of all the wonderful things they seemed capable of. Healing bones in seconds, creating beautiful moving pieces of art, spells to do every household chore, animals whose fur and feathers could create potions to become invisible, to fly, to walk on water. The options were endless. It seemed there was nothing they were not capable of. However, he had also learned of things that made his previous fear seem like a child's fear of the dark. Curses to make one's skin boil, bones vanish, heart stop, objects whose touch brought death. Rituals to destroy enemies' minds, or to make one have the strength of 100 men. It seemed for every beautiful thing these wizards created, there were a dozen ways to turn it to evil purposes. He had begun to keep these dark things separate from the younger boys, not wanting to taint them with the darkness, letting them see the wonders instead. In his heart, he had begun to wonder if it would do more damage than help to the human race to expose these monsters. If a few miracle cures were worth the price, if a man could buy a cure for blindness, could he not also purchase a potion to create it? Over and over, after he opened the bloody box and calmly catalogued the grisly objects within, the question repeated in his mind. Was it worth it? Things began to change. At first, for the better. It didn't take long at all for the other boys to realize that Harry had a knack for finding magical objects. Luckily for him, they were not always artifacts that Mr. Steele took away to the back room. The third object he found was a miniature red bird in a beautiful silver cage, about the size of a man's fist. The small bird within would sing songs whenever a light was turned on and seemed to give off a peaceful aura. Mr. Steele explained that it was a wizarding child's toy, often kept above toddlers' bed to make them laugh. It didn't have to be fed or watered like a normal bird, and the boys couldn't find any switch or batteries that operated it. Magic, Tiny proudly proclaimed after another attempt to find a power source failed. Mike wanted to bust the bird open to see what it looked like inside, but Rick shook his head. That would be a shame. It's so pretty. The black-haired boy rolled his eyes and frowned at him. Across the room, where he was absently writing on a pad of paper, Care laughed. You can't do that, cause Tiny already asked if he could have it. He wants to keep it in his room, and Mr. Steele said it wasn't a problem. Yes, Tiny exclaimed, and grabbed the cage from out of Mike's reach before trotting to his room to hang it up. Harry shook his head, imagining listening to birdsong all night long. It was a good day. Time passed in days that flew by with winged feet. Never before had Harry felt so included, so much a part of a group of people. He might still be at odds with Mike, but he was beginning to think of the Steeles as his family. He went on countless trips searching for magical artifacts, did his chores, built furniture, reluctantly read school books, and in his free time played games with Tiny. It had been over a year since Mr. Steele and the group had taken him in. Harry knew, in the back of his head, that he should be about 9.5 years old now. The other boys never celebrated birthdays, so Harry never really felt like mentioning it when his rolled around at the end of July. Instead, the boys celebrated every time they brought back something that was worthwhile to Mr. Steele. Almost every time, when it was Harry's turn to creep forward to steal a box, he would feel steered to a certain area. Every time this happened, the object was magical. Harry began to separate different tugs as well, and by the time 3 months had gone by, he could tell different types of tugs. If numb fingers accompanied the tug, it was dark. If it was a very light tug, it usually led to a toy or some sort of candy. If it felt like a heavy, dull tug, it was something that contained a powerful spell like the dagger. Sometimes he would feel more than one tug and could choose which one to follow. Sometimes a tug could feel like more than one sensation, which could mean it was an innocent toy with a powerful spell on it, or a book that contained a dark aura. Even so, it was always a surprise to find out what he had taken that day, though he was often tempted to explain the weird feelings to the other boys and Mr. Steele. Something always held him back. What if they thought that he had been corrupted by one of the artifacts, or if a wizard had somehow gotten a hold of him and cursed him? Harry just shrugged when they asked him about it and told them it must be luck. Eventually, the boys stopped asking how. Harry was glad they hadn't started asking why. Would he always be a freak, just like his uncle said? Not all of the boys were happy with Harry's talent. Mike seemed to get angrier every time and had gone from tolerant to downright jealous and spiteful. Rick also wasn't entirely happy with Harry's success, feeling that the boy must be using some trick that he refused to share with the others. It came to a head when Care called them together to make an announcement. The boys were all sitting down around the table in the kitchen. Care stood up, then asked Harry and Tiny to come over. Mr. Steele has informed me that you two have about earned your first wing. Harry was speechless. He remembered when he first came to the gang and finding out about their tattoos. It had all seemed so unattainable back then. Don't we get our first one after a solo assignment? Tiny asked from next to him. Harry felt his jaw sink a little. Figures they would have to go through a test first. Usually, yes. However, Mr. Steele doesn't want us going out alone anymore. Haven't really needed to split up anyway, with Harry here bringing in so much. Care smiled at Harry with these words. Mike and Rick both frowned as Care continued. Tiny has been doing a wonderful job too, of course. It is actually past time for him to get his, but we figured you two could both get them done the same day. Tiny nodded, but Harry could tell that he would have rather gotten his done separately. Though the boy never acted it, Harry could tell that Tiny felt a little bit left behind. We will all be going with you two to get it done next Saturday after midnight. Mr. Steele has a man that does it for us. He did all of ours. Care gestured to Mike and Rick. Neither of them looked happy, at least not for Harry. Both seemed genuine as they congratulated Tiny, but were sharp and brisk with Harry. So Skinny here will be a wing. How ironic, Mike muttered under his breath to Rick. Before Harry could turn and look back at him, Care spoke up. We'll have to go the back ways. Don't want to attract any attention. Care then began to explain the route they would take and some basics about how to take care of tattoos after getting them. By the time Care was done, all the boys were ready for bed, and Harry had forgot about Mike's comment. When Harry and Tiny finally went back to their room that night, it was hard to get to sleep. You think it will hurt much, Harry? Tiny asked. Before he could even answer, Tiny continued. I wonder if we'll ever get our second wing. You think so? How long you think before the tattoo heals and we can show it off? I hate that we have to keep it bandaged for a week and rub that smelly stuff on it. Care sure does care a lot about infection. I bet no one's ever had any trouble before. I bet. Harry tuned Tiny out. His own thoughts were a world away. For him, the tattoo represented that he was finally going to be fully accepted into the Steel Wings. It wouldn't matter that Mike and Rick didn't like him as much. He would be one of them now. Maybe he could spend the rest of his life here, helping Mr. Steele research the odd and mysterious wizards. Maybe one day he and Mr. Steele could expose them to the world, and then he, Harry, would be a hero. Mr. Steele sat alone in his office, his face portraying infinite calm. In front of him lay a newspaper article open to a certain page. The newspaper showed signs of being read through many times, and this particular page was earmarked more than the rest. Slowly, Mr. Steele extended his hand and tapped a finger once, twice, thrice on the moving picture of a fiery salamander that peeked out from the back of a woman's exposed shoulder. Maybe this time. His voice, a whisper, pierced the silence of the room. The Folly of Wizarding Tattoos Daily Prophet, March 1995 by Andrew Simmons. It's come to my attention that a few young fools have decided to restart the tradition of getting tattoos. It's a fad that recurs every few decades before some bright witch or wizard goes too far and scares everyone off the idea again. History has shown that any magical being who permanently inks anything into their skin is in for a usually unpleasant surprise. What we have learned is relatively simple. If a wizard designs his own tattoo and spells it on himself, the tattoo will do exactly as he wants it to. If he, of course, has the proper wand work and pronounces everything exactly right. If he goes to the ministry and gets a certified magical symbologist to put the tattoo on, it will perform the magic he desires as well. However, you cannot simply turn the tattoo on or off. If you enchant your tattoo to move around your body, it will move no matter what. If you allow a dog tattoo to bark, it will bark whenever it wants. And magical tattoos have proven nearly impossible to remove. Simply cutting off the skin and using a regrowing potion will have the skin come back with the tattoo still prominent. Magical symbologist Jerry Clacker puts it this way. When you ink a tattoo of any kind on your skin, it also tends to ink itself on your magical core. Since it withdraws the magic to operate from your core itself, if you try to remove it, it will not leave unless you remove the magic it is drawing from, in effect removing a portion of your own magic. This is a serious thing to consider when thinking about getting a tattoo. A few well-known cases of magical tattoos gone wrong include Orion de Curis Lestring in the early 1300s, who tattooed himself with black dragons that he intended to spit fire at enemies. However, the dragons instead set his clothing alight, and whoever came close enough were fair game for the pesky beasts. In the early 1900s, famous Aura Grail Falconwar had an eye tattooed on the back of his neck, so he could see enemies behind him. Unfortunately, the mind was not made to have three eyes, and ever after he tended to stumble and stagger around, and soon was forcibly retired after accidentally cursing Octavian Malfoy with a balding jinx, instead of the co-worker he was planning to prank. More recently, curse his name, the infamous you-know-who was known to force all his followers to receive his own magical tattoo that could allow them to teleport straight to his side. And if his name were ever said in the presence of one who had the tattoo, he would be able to listen in on anything that was said. And of course, in all the cases above, the tattoos took up enough magic that removing them would result in immediate squibhood. The dark mark, curses upon it, is a permanent identifying reminder of any who have bowed their necks to he who must not be named. But what about purely muggle tattoos? If it is unenchanted, can it be easily removed? The answer is no. The few wizards that have tried it have found it entirely unstable and an even bigger risk than a purposefully enchanted tattoo. It seems, when a wizard gets a tattoo without it being applied with a spell and a purposeful intention, the magic of the recipient of the tattoo will spontaneously activate it. Mary Kigler, bless her soul, who at the time was chaser for the Chudley Cannons, found this out when she went with her friends to get a small fire salamander tattoo on her shoulder in response to a lost bet. See picture 3A. After waking up the day after getting the tattoo, she felt a horrible burning sensation. Looking in the mirror, she saw that the salamander was dancing in fire that had not been tattooed there, and that the fire was actually burning her skin. After going to the hospital to be treated with the burns, and finding out that any time it got dark the tattoo would again burst into flames, she had to have it removed, and found to her horror that the loss of the magic that powered the tattoo took away her ability to fly on a broom. As you can see, it is complete folly for any wizard or witch to get a tattoo of any kind. When looking at more unpleasant examples, Frederick Vierfrock, Kant, on PG. 7b, tilde review please. 4. And here's the child singing high. Author's note. Many thanks to G.J. Mega for editing this. Excerpts from Before the Fall. Dark days. The auras were getting desperate. He who must not be named's forces were getting stronger every day. Several auras came up with research on how to utilize the dark mark against the Death Eaters. It has become well known recently that whenever he, who must not be named, became angry, The Death Eaters who bore the mark would flinch as their mark began to flare. It would burn fiercely whenever they were summoned to a meeting. It could be used against the Death Eaters by the Dark Lord as a means of discipline for failure. At that time, Auras noticed the phenomenon on captured prisoners and began to assign men to monitor anywhere wizards congregated, like Diagon Alley. They were to watch the crowd from above, then report any disturbances that multiple persons had at the same time, like grabbing their arms simultaneously. They were to immediately apprehend these subjects for investigation. The success rate of this technique was phenomenal and resulted in many captures in the weeks before the fall. It illustrates yet another example of the unintended consequences of wizarding tattoos. The trip seemed to take forever. Harry was so excited, it was hard for him to concentrate on where he was going, and before long, he had no idea where they were in the city. They went through alleys, over roofs, and across roads. He was almost convinced that they were taking a long and winding route for just the purpose of not being able to remember how they got here. Care seemed to walk confidently, though, and Harry could imagine he had been here many times before. When they finally came to a stop before a dark warehouse-looking apartment building, Care turned to them. "Be careful, and do not ask questions. He will not give his name, so do not bother giving yours. He knows two people are getting one wing apiece, and he has the sizes and details. Tiny, you go first. Remember all we talked about. Relax and think of something else. Do not forget to breathe." With a reassuring nod to Tiny and Harry, he climbed the steps and entered a dimly lit hallway. They went up several floors using the back stairs before stopping at room 47. Care had barely knocked twice before a man opened the door and quickly beckoned them in. The man looked malnourished with a sickly tint to his skin, but the apartment itself looked surprisingly clean and well kept. The furniture was all nice, and the floors were carpeted. It did not seem to belong to this type of apartment building or this man. They entered a side room, what used to be a bedroom by the design of it. In the middle was a bench-like chair, and Tiny quickly walked over to it and lay down on his stomach like Care had told him to do. The man smiled slightly before beginning to lay out various tools. He was careful to sanitize his hands, and all of his equipment was shiny with frequent washes. Harry already felt a little better about the idea. He felt a poke and turned to see Mike beckoning at him to sit down in some chairs lined up on the side of the room. Harry felt nervous just watching the man get ready, but Tiny seemed comfortable. He barely flinched as the man began cleaning his shoulder where the tattoo was to go with antibacterial lotion. "Ready," the man muttered to Tiny. Once he received a quick nod, he slowly began to outline the design. It must have taken at least an hour, but the time flew. Harry heard a soft word spoken every once in a while, but other than that they were all quiet. It amazed Harry that the man barely spoke at all, other than a direction every once in a while to relax. Suddenly the man leaned back and stretched out his arms. "I'm done here. I'll be back in a few minutes to do the next one." With that he walked from the room, and Harry heard a door shut somewhere else in the apartment. Tiny slowly sat up. "Does it look okay?" he asked, trying to look over his shoulder. "Dimwit, we can't see it. He already bandaged it for the night. Saves us the trouble, don't want you bleeding all over your shirt." Mike scoffed. Tiny's face fell a little bit. "Oh. I didn't even feel him do that. He's fast." Tiny looked at Harry. "It wasn't bad at all. It tickled a little, and it hurt bad at first, but after a while you kind of get numb to it." Tiny smiled brightly. "I can't wait to see it tomorrow." The man abruptly walked into the room, and Tiny scampered off the bench and over to an empty chair. Harry slowly stood up and walked nervously over to the bench. For a moment he forgot how he was supposed to sit. Mike snickered, and Harry felt a flash of anger. Why did that boy have to be so contentious? Yeah, that was the word. Harry took off his shirt and lay down, but flinched when he felt a cold hand touch his shoulder. "Relax," the man muttered. Harry found himself holding his breath and let it out in a whoosh. Why was this so hard? He did not want the others to see him scared, but something about the thought of a needle cutting his skin was hard to handle. Harry tried to think of something else. It was hard to concentrate with the man moving tools about, and he could almost hear Mike whispering something to Tiny and soft laughter. He flinched again at another touch, and the man made an annoyed sound. Harry tried to hold still. What was he supposed to think about? Tattoos. No, that thought would only lead to needles. He was getting a wing on his shoulder, a steel wing to represent the group and Mr. Steel. It was a symbol of pride and family. Do wizards make wings to fly around on? The thought seemed to pop out of nowhere, and Harry latched on to it. Mr. Steele had mentioned broomsticks, though, so they probably did not. Harry felt a sharp pain and desperately tried to think of something else. Wizards. They could do anything, it seemed like. Harry bet they could make wings if they wanted to. What would having wings be like? To be able to fly wherever you wanted. Why, if he had wings, he would even be able to easily get away from any attacks, even from wizards. And if they were steel wings, they would surely be able to reflect back any odd laser spells the wizards shot at him. Harry began to warm up to his daydream. The constant stinging feeling on his back was beginning to become normal, not bad at all. But man, steel wings would be so awesome. Would they be heavy? Steel is pretty heavy, but really strong. If he had wings, though, he would need to be strong enough to use them. How would that work? Bird wings were light, hollow steel. Harry felt himself starting to drift off, the pain in his shoulder dulling as continuous pressure was applied. If wizards attacked him, he could just fly away, or maybe even attack them. Steel feathers would be sharp, deadly. He closed his eyes, relaxed, trying to picture it. They had spotted him stealing a package from a doorway. He saw them pointing their laser sticks and quickly climbed up a ladder to the rooftop, the men fast behind him. When the wizards reached the top, he would swoop down and... But there was another wizard suddenly behind him. He felt dread wash over him. The dark figure paced towards him slowly, looming over him. Red eyes seemed to glisten from underneath the hood, and Harry heard a phantom scream from all around him, a woman's shrill voice. Before he could make out the words, the man began to speak in a sibilant voice. "You will never defeat me." The voice pierced him like a knife, and Harry could see a green light gathering between himself and the dark wizard. In slow motion, Harry turned and ran towards the edge of the roof, desperate to get away from the green light, terror filling him. If it touched him, surely it would what? His forehead burned and he thrust himself off the roof, plummeting down towards the ground. Suddenly he remembered. He had wings, of course. He spread them out and caught the wind, angling up and away from the building. He was flying through a cloudy, dark space. Was he high up? It seemed he could almost see his reflection in the clouds. He began to descend, spiraling down slowly, enjoying the freedom of flight. He forgot all about his terror earlier with the wizard, and instead lost himself in the feeling of being aloft in the air. Flying was amazing. He suddenly saw ground beneath him and began a slow descent. He landed with a slow jog onto soft green grass. The sun seemed to be shining all of a sudden, and he could almost hear the sounds of a breeze moving through trees. He turned to see better when he was abruptly faced with a mirror. In it, he saw himself with two majestic wings spread out behind him. They were steel gray with black markings running along the feathers. When he began to fold them mostly, the black seemed to show, and as he stood there, idly moving his wings, he felt an odd sensation deep in his chest. He closed his eyes, wondering, and could almost see what looked like a bright glowing sphere. It was made up of millions of tiny strands of light. From the sphere, more tiny strings seemed to run throughout his body. They barely gave off any light, except where they gathered in his hands and forehead. As he stood there, he could feel the sphere pulsing in time with his heart, and when he took a breath, it seemed to expand, then contract again as he breathed out. Was he seeing his heart? Were the strands of light blood pulsing through his veins? Suddenly, the light shifted, and Harry felt a pull in his chest cut off his air for a second. Another pull. The sphere seemed to be shifting back slightly. Then strands of light began to unravel from the sphere and move towards his back. They pulled for a moment at where his wings met his skin. Then, with a quick rush that felt like the air being pulled from his lungs, the strands expanded through his wings. They moved into every bone, every muscle, and every feather. Even the very tines that made up each feather began to glow. Harry could not breathe. The sphere of light was getting smaller and smaller, beating slower and slower. Was he going to die? The light inside his chest dulled to almost non-existence, and Harry felt as if he was about to lose something precious, something that made him who he was. Then the pulling stopped, and he could breathe again. He sucked in air in quick gasps and saw that the light had stopped spreading through his wings. It hovered for a second, glowing, before beginning to retreat back inside him. The wings went with them. At first, the wings, outlined in bright, shining light, curled around his body, covering him from head to toe. Then they began to get smaller and smaller, turning completely to light as it re-entered his body. The light wings were so small Harry could barely see any details at all, only the barest impression of feathers on wing-shaped objects. They seemed to now furl around the sphere of light, and for a second resembled a winged ball which sent an odd echo of memory through Harry's mind. Then they were gone. All that remained was the sphere, now pulsing on time with his heart. Harry opened his eyes, once more faced with his reflection. The wings were gone as if they had never been there. Harry abruptly staggered as something pushed him in his shoulder. He spun around, only to see nothing. A sudden sharp pain on his cheek made him angrily open his mouth to shout, and saw Mike's grinning face. A dream. It had only been a dream. The other boys, even Care, teased him unmercifully about falling asleep while getting his tattoo done. Even the man grinned before ushering them out of the apartment. Harry felt at a loss. How could it have been a dream? It had felt so real, the feeling of flying, of soaring over the ground. Even the weight on his back had felt real. The journey back was just as winding as the one there, but they took a different path back that didn't involve as much climbing. Harry was almost surprised to see a glimmer of dawn on the horizon. They had been out all night. Don't want to stretch out those new tattoos, do we? Care laughed as they skirted around another building. Harry heard more laughter and saw Tiny's exuberant face. Tiny seemed to be on an emotional high, talking over and over to the others about how he could not wait to see his tattoo the next day. Finally, Mike gave Tiny a playful shove and said in a not-so-playful voice, "Enough already." Harry sighed, which attracted Mike's baleful attention. "What, not happy with your little wing, Skinny?" Mike sneered at him. Harry wanted to snap something back at him, but lost the energy. He felt as if he had run a long-distance race over bad ground. It didn't help that they had all now been awake all night going into morning. "Leave me alone," Harry muttered. Mike laughed. The older boy loved any opportunity to pick on him. "Ooh, leave me alone," Mike mimicked in a whiny voice. He then smiled viciously. "Try not to fall asleep on us, ha 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 ha." "Oh, stop it, Mike, it's late. Or early, I guess." Rick spoke up. Rick has been silent most of the trip and seemed to be deep in thought. Mike just shrugged and turned away. It wasn't any fun to pick on the younger boy when the others might get annoyed. By the time they got back to Mr. Steele's place, the sun was just beginning to shine over the top of the buildings. Care quietly told Tiny and him to go to bed before staying behind to murmur something to the boys. Harry was too tired to care about trying to eavesdrop. He fell into bed with barely a pause to undress and was asleep before his head touched the pillow. He dreamed of flying. When Harry woke up, he felt as if something was holding him down to the bed. He was so tired. Just the thought of walking down the stairs to eat breakfast made him wince. What was he going to do? He wanted to sleep another day, at least. "Get down here or you aren't eating." Rick's voice echoed up the stairs. Harry heard Tiny groan and turn over, then yelp and sit up. Ouch. Tiny wrinkled his nose at the unexpected pain. "This hurts more than I thought it would. My back is sore, yours feels sore." Harry turned over and sat up, stretching his arms a bit. "Yeah, my whole back feels like I got stomped on by an elephant." Tiny shook his head. "My whole back doesn't feel sore, but the right side does, that's for sure." Harry shook his head, then stood up and carefully began to get dressed. It was very difficult to pull his shirt over his head. As he struggled, Tiny began to bubble in excitement. It didn't seem the younger boy was that hampered by the wound. "You think we can see them? What time is it? It's got to be way past breakfast by now." "I mean, it was practically breakfast when we got back. It's probably supper time. They said tonight, right?" "Right." Tiny seemed to have gotten over any soreness he felt as he quickly rushed downstairs to find out. Harry just sighed and sat back on the bed, raised a hand to his chest and massaged a bit, circling his solar plexus. What was that feeling? He felt stretched thin or oddly out of shape and short of breath. Was he getting sick? That would just figure that he would get sick now that he was finally a real member of Steel Wings. "Come on, Harry," they said after we eat. Tiny's voice drifted into the room, and Harry reluctantly stood up. He hoped it didn't do this the next time he got a tattoo. It was miserable, if he ever got another anyway. He hoped so. Having just one would feel really lopsided. As he limped slowly downstairs, he was met with the sight of the boys eating dinner with Mr. Steele. He immediately stood up straighter and tried to act like he wasn't hurting that bad. Mr. Steele smiled at him. "There you are. We were beginning to wonder if you were hungry. Sit down, sit down. It's already dinner time." Mr. Steele pointed to a chair, and Harry caught an odd look. Mr. Steele seemed to be disappointed in something. Throughout the meal, Harry noticed Mr. Steele staring at him. Harry ate slowly, hunched over, and tried to just disappear, but the boys kept asking him questions and talking loudly. He was beginning to get a serious headache and really wanted to go back to bed for the next few years. "Okay, I'm done. Can I take the bandage off now?" Tiny burst out finally. The boy was practically bouncing in his seat. "Please." Laughter filled the room. It seemed everyone was enjoying themselves but Harry. What was wrong? Abruptly, he knew he needed to get out of the room. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly. Before anyone could ask him what was wrong, he muttered "bathroom" and walked quickly down the hall. He closed the door to the bathroom behind him and leaned over the sink. When he looked into the mirror, he was struck by something missing. Wings. Wings that are not painted on, but real wings, able to be spread wide and soar high in the sky. Harry shook his head, angry at himself more than anyone else. That stupid dream. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see the image burned into his mind. Two steel grey wings run through with strands of light. In his dream, those lights had taken the wings away. He was suddenly struck by the odd idea that maybe, just maybe, those lights could bring them back. A knock on the door struck him out of his wild thoughts. "You all right in there, Harry?" It was Mr. Steele. Harry suddenly realized that his thoughts were madness. What was he trying to do? Turn himself into a wizard? He shook his head at himself and opened the door to look into Mr. Steele's concerned eyes. "I'm fine, just a little sore from last night. I'm sure it will go away soon." Even to himself, Harry's voice sounded weak. "Oh, no doubt it will. Well, do not worry about the boys. They like to tease, but at heart you are part of the family now. Come into the living room. Tiny is showing off his back, and everyone wants to see yours too." This last was said with a deep, piercing look. Mr. Steele looked like he was about to say something more, but instead turned away and gestured towards the other room. Harry followed him, still confused and off balance. He could not get rid of the feeling that everything had changed while he was sleeping, and that Mr. Steele had an inkling why. Tiny's tattoo was a perfect replica of the other boy's. The single wing was gracefully angled across his right shoulder, and each feather was carefully detailed. Something seemed off about it, though, and Harry quickly saw why. The wing did not match the one he imagined himself having in his dream. There were no black marks running the length of the feathers, and the size was off. This wing was overly simplified, almost like it was more of the idea of how a wing should look, rather than a picture of an actual wing. The secondary feathers were much too short, and there was no alula or wrist feathers at all. This was not a wing that could bear a person in flight. You would fall from the sky. Harry found himself horrified at the thought and quickly shook his head. This was not the time to be daydreaming. "Harry, something wrong?" Care asked, and Harry saw Mr. Steele quickly turn out of the corner of his eye. "Oh no, nothing is wrong. I'm just feeling a bit under the weather. I think I'm going to go upstairs." Before he could even turn, Mike quickly slid forward and grabbed him. "Oh no, you're not. We get to see your pretty little wing first." Mike smiled maliciously, but Care was nodding along with him. "The bandage needs to be changed. There is always a little blood the first night, and you do not want to get any type of infection from leaving it on too long." Care beckoned Harry closer, and he reluctantly began to pull off his shirt. It was not till he turned around to let Care take off the bandage that he realized something was wrong. All the talking in the room had stopped. Even Tiny was quiet. He began to turn back around to see what was wrong when Care stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "Mike, you were watching right. Harry was only given one tattoo. Harry, what did you do?" Care asked, his voice unreadable. Harry was confused. Care had not even taken the bandage off. What on earth was he talking about? "What do you mean?" "Harry, you have a tattoo on your left shoulder as well, and it's different than ours." Care's voice sounded odd. Harry wished he would let him turn around so he could see his face. "What do you mean? I only got the tattoo last night. It is a wing, right?" "Little liar. I bet he snuck out last night to try and get one up on us. No wonder he's so tired. And he didn't even get it right. It's different," Mike yelled out, his face alight with justified anger. "Of course it is a wing, Harry. It's just shaped and colored a bit differently than ours. And it's, well, bigger." Care was interrupted by Mike. "That's probably because he couldn't remember what it was supposed to look like. The little brat. Now here, boys, I'm sure there is a perfectly good explanation for this. Come here, Harry. Rick, go get a mirror for us, please. Meet us in the bathroom," Mr. Steele said quietly. Harry finally got a good look at the other boys. Tiny looked furious and Care looked disappointed. Mr. Steele was oddly calm. Mike acted like it was Christmas. The boy who could do no wrong was finally in trouble. Rick just stared, confused. He knew for a fact that Harry had not left last night because Rick himself had snuck out to meet a girl outside. There was only the one entrance and exit. No one had gone through. When Harry got to the bathroom, Mr. Steele had him turn around and look into a hand mirror so he could see his back in the bathroom mirror. It was his wing. Exactly, in every detail, down to the very last feather. It stretched from the top of his neck all the way down the left side of his back, ending barely above the waistband of his pants. It was smaller than the ones he had in his dream by quite a bit, but still, every detail was right. This was a wing that could fly. But how had this happened? His mind could not comprehend it. Had he been corrupted by a magical artifact? Was this some sort of perverse joke by Mike? Was he still dreaming? Mr. Steele reached up and carefully peeled off the bandage on his right side to reveal another wing just like the one on his left side. Impossible. I saw it. It was just like ours last night. I swear. Tiny burst out. He looked quickly between Harry and Mr. Steele. I was watching close. Mr. Steele shook his head and began to walk out of the crowded bathroom and back into the living room. Harry was desperate. What had happened? Was he still dreaming? Harry quickly followed Mr. Steele into the larger room. "Sir, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened, I promise." Harry burst out, so afraid that he might lose his newfound family. "Oh, you are getting it good now. Hey, maybe he will get kicked out." The last Mike whispered to Rick just loud enough for Harry to hear it. Harry felt his heart begin beating faster. It was a disaster. Mr. Steele said nothing, just shook his head. He looked overwhelmed. We're going to make him leave. Harry was sure of it now. None of the other boys would stick up for him if they thought he did this on purpose. The tattoo was supposed to be a special symbol that was earned, not just some trivial mark. They thought he had cheated and probably stole some money to pay for it. Oh, how he wished he could just fly away like he had in his dream. Harry closed his eyes in despair and clutched fervently at that thought. He wanted to just fly away. At that thought, something entirely odd happened. His heart seemed to skip a beat and then began to race. His breath caught and he was pushed forward. His back ached fiercely, and then there was a sharp, burning pain that ended as quickly as it had come. Harry abruptly realized that he had fallen to his hands and knees. He slowly stood up, feeling lighter and finally pain-free for the first time since last night. When he shakily looked at the other boys, he was greeted with looks of shock. Mr. Steele's was the only one who looked like he knew what was happening, but he also seemed amazed that it had. "What's wrong?" Harry whispered. There was no answer right away, and then Mr. Steele stood up and approached him. Mr. Steele walked carefully, looking at something over Harry's head. Harry turned to see what could possibly be wrong, only to hear a ching sound, like the scrape of metal on metal. Before he could turn farther, Mr. Steele spoke. "Oh, child. I've been waiting for this for so long, hoping." He shook his head as if ashamed at himself. "Look over your shoulder slowly. Try not to turn. Do not panic." That did not sound reassuring. Harry did as he asked, and they were there. Just like he dreamt, just like he imagined. They were huge, easily twice the size of his body. How? Two metal wings, seeming to merge with the skin on his back. He twitched his shoulders, could feel how they were attached. It was like suddenly having two extra arms and no idea how to make them move. How do you twitch fingers you've never had before? "Harry," Mr. Steele breathed. Harry turned and looked into the face of the older man, uncomprehending. "How, sir? Why? I don't understand." Harry rambled. He knew he was supposed to be panicking. He knew that he would when the shock wore off. "How?" Mr. Steele spoke quietly, calmly, his eyes seeming to communicate that everything would be all right. "You're a wizard, Harry." "Tilda, review, please."